Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon to everybody. Gio will be here shortly, but today I kind of wanted to talk about, as the title suggests, something that's not political for once. And despite everything that we're currently seeing around in our spheres, what we're talking about, whether it's the trial, whether it's other news that we see going on, I think that it is important that we try and understand that we can go through some of the toughest things imaginable, and at the same time, we can try and overcome them. So today will hopefully be rather a novel conversation, as well as sort of this tangential one as we talk about things that have gone on in our own lives as well. Hence why I have the ever so wonderful image up on there. But as we wait for Gio to come and join us, I figured that we would sort of just outline some of the things that I'm probably going to talk about today. As the title suggests, we're talking about sort of pain, consciousness, and mortality. And, pain comes in a lot of forms. Pain can be that of psychic pain, it can be that of physical pain. And how does that affect a person? How do we carry on, especially when something that we've often talked about, whether it's on this channel or in a variety of other conversations that you might see online or even at church or wherever you socialize, is this discussion about atomization and the idea that individuals can eventually lose track of who they are, their idea of what the real world is. We see the phrase about touching grass so often, and while all of that takes place, that we end up in a position where nothing else really matters except sort of the right in front of us. Our attention spans are shortened, and the slightest grievance, right, becomes this sort of end of the world scenario. And when that happens, of course, that's what we want to try and avoid, because that complete atomization, sort of that small-souled adult bug man that we so often talk about, is the exact last kind of thing that we want to, be. And for those of you who are, on this channel and have subscribed, you kind of know my journey in Tan. I'll probably talk a little bit more about that as well throughout today's stream. Yet, I think that it's important for us to start with sort of the usual suspects when it comes to these sort of things. So, what do I mean by that? I mean the idea that individuals will take a look at the world going on around them, they'll take a look at their lifestyle, they'll take a look at their environment. And the first thing that we often do in this society, especially for those, who don't buy into some sort of higher teleological meaning or calling in life, is the idea that we are going to blame anything but ourselves. And for as much hell and crap that gets thrown to Jordan Peterson's way, and he rightfully deserves it because I think he doesn't go all the way sometimes in his analysis, he is sort of right about the environmental aspect of it. If you are going to be in a position where you are depressed, if you're going to be in a position where you let certain factors in your life cause you, either a physical situation or a mental one, then the fault does lie squarely on you, right? And you're putting yourself in a position where the idea of, oh well, it's X, Y, and Z, and it always leads to this very reductive sort of root cause argumentation, post hoc ergo proctor hoc kind of analysis. Well, because this happens, we're going to blame this, right? And all of which allows them to not ever examine themselves. And I think it's the lack of introspection that allows a certain kind of consciousness to permeate throughout society. And I'm not just referring to sort of the idea of like the slave mentality or the NPC, because that definitely exists, but there are people who can be very much like us in terms of our awareness, our critical thinking skills, our ideas. And every time that this happens, right, we are finding ourselves in a position where we will simply blame everything else and we'll not take a look at the environment around us. You'll see this all the time where there's that lovely meme, right, where it's like, damn, bitch, you live like this. And when that happens, right, all of a sudden we see just this room that is absolutely in chaos. We see a life that is absolutely in chaos and inability to really interact with the world around us in a way that isn't, me, 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 me. And I think this comes from a lot of reasons, and we'll get into this once he comes on. But until then, I'll just simply play as the main host. I do on the channel. And I think one of them, of course, is the abolition of man, as C.S. Lewis would describe. The idea that man has no longer beholden himself to a higher power, to a higher cause. And lo and behold, look who's here. Hello, Gio. How are you?
Uh, I'm having technical problems, not too good. I
Oh no.
lost all of my tabs. I mean, I screen capped most of them, I think. So I have to I don't know. It's my fault. But anyway, sorry if I'm late. I'm just
You're
wilding
good.
right now.
Just a little tardy in homosex, but I think you're fine.
Oh fuck. I don't know. Just something weird going on. I don't know. I think people are just screwed up recently. I think that's. I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying. What am I saying?
Well,
It seems like there's a
that's okay.
malaise in the air.
There is a malaise in the air. And I mean, as I was sort of just talking about it and ranting and riffing until you got on, as I said that this was going to be really tangential and kind of personal. That it's a non-political stream, which is always nice in my opinion. And even better about it is that there is a malaise in the air, and I think for a lot of people, they end up in that sort of root cause kind of debate in their mind, where it just becomes that sort of post hoc rationalization where,
Mhm.
oh, because this is my malaise, I'm going to blame this, and they don't look towards themselves, or they don't look towards their environment that they have direct control over and influence. As Jordan Peterson as that sounds, right? There's still a lot of truth to it.
Yeah, that is true. But anyways, I think I tweeted this the other day, and people, I don't know, it's really weird when you get into a position where you're a bit, I guess, I mean, bigger is, I guess, the right word. You have a lot of people that will just say random nonsense, or they'll misinterpret you or whatever. I think it's just par for the course. It's just one of those things. But no, I think everything's just been I know we're not supposed to we wanted to get away from it, but I think politically this whole trial thing, as we said, has been a real sort of litmus test or Schelling point to determine there is this one irony person I screen cap today, and you see how many mutuals follow people like that. It's damn, it's kind of. But then I don't know. I mean, people have different reasons for why they follow certain accounts. I guess I don't know. It's really weird. I feel like it's just ever since the beginning of the year, things have been kind of hyper real, and not this, our grip on reality is sort of slowly fading away, I guess. I don't know. Anyways, sorry, I'm just babbling right
You're
now.
riffing. You're fine. That's
Yeah.
kind of what I wanted to do today, was to not necessarily have a set subject. I mean, we had a conversation. So for context, right? Last week, Gio and I had a conversation, sort of a one-off on, break the rules, which I was a guest, which I'm always thankful to come on. And we sort of talked about the effect that pain has on the consciousness, our own experiences with health and our family's health, and how that stuff can sort of, either pull back this layer of understanding or give you another layer of understanding about how you look at the world, and how that sticks with you, and how that changes your perspective in the world, especially if you're a religious person, and it kind of makes things a lot more real for you. And both Gio and I are of Christians of different churches, but I think that kind of gives us a good way to feel and understand about the world around us, especially as we just see how many people are lost or are in that sort of hyper real situation, and they lose that teleological connection to what we would consider our way out of this mess.
Yeah. Like I think it's very difficult because I remember, I think it was Gary on Twitter that said this, please be patient, where he said that, we'll never live in the same reality as these people ever again, which is true. I mean, we haven't lived in the same reality for quite a while, but I had this video, now it seems kind of redundant. But it seems like it's very difficult to contemplate, let's call it a social ontology, where if you bracket our enemies by and large have the ability to manufacture opinion and the parameters by which people even interpret reality. But let's bracket all of that. Let's say in a purely equal playing field, what is it like if you half the people in a civilization view not just small not just conceptually, but also like on a material level, view things quite differently than the average person. Like, than the average person of like the other camp or ontology. Like, what is it like to live in a bifurcated society? Like today, this terrible ghoul that talked about, even the way we describe them, that talked about like, inflation, that's like a product of, right-wing propaganda. That's not real. Like, but yet you go to the grocery store and you go to like see the base commodities of things, and it's like, man, like I can look at the gas meter and I can look at the sign and say that, but that's, I think, just but then the lying about it too, like people saying, why don't right-wingers care about housing prices, even though like, BlackRock gets like a woke cover from the New York Times saying, well, the single family housing, that's racist. That's a racist 1950s atomic family. That's like Pleasantville, Pleasantville being like for people who don't know, that was like one of the worst Hollywood attacks on the American consciousness there ever was by certain people. Say no more. But yeah, so I think it's the lying about it which really gets to me. I think like that's in a case like the Rittenhouse thing is perfect because it's the ambiguity of it. It's sort of like the hyper modern, like even if there's like drone footage with our own lying eyes, we could still see that there's something wrong there. Like there's an ambiguity. Not, I mean, to us, like I believe there's no ambiguity whatsoever, but you know what I mean? And the people in the media that have to lie about it, it's like that. It's very interesting. It's very weird. And also like the lurid, like unconscious, like Freudian fantasy work going on around Kyle and his mother, and like just really creepy, awfuls, affluent white liberal females posting their short story erotica text site fantasies, as I said. But anyways, I don't want to talk about this. So this stream we were talking about, we wanted to elaborate on what we were talking about in terms of our own experience with like with personal pain and anxiety, and I think it's very interesting because both of us, like, I mean, you've went through like quite a severe life-threatening event, and while me, like, anyway, how about you go first? You go. It's your show.
Well, sure, right. So for those who or came here from Gio or have not been around for a long time, as I've said, it's actually to the day 5 months ago I had gotten a kidney transplant and I was getting ready to be wheeled out of the hospital. And it was sort of this ticking time bomb.
A Chinese prisoner had to give his life for that kid. Oh,
we'll get there in a second when I talk about that. Because
oh shit, I was joking.
Oh no, you're fine. We'll get there in a minute. Trust me, because that's probably like the one thing that eats at me. But like I knew this was coming. I had dealt with a birth defect when I was a kid, and I've known from 6 years old that at one point in my life that things are gonna jump the shark and my life is going to change. And I knew what that looked like, from a very young age. And when it finally happened, I don't think throughout the entire time of like hemodialysis, the at-home stuff, the pills, the limited diet, I think the only thing I really bitched about was the fluid intake, because like that wasn't meant for, you can't drink X amount of like milliliters of fluid a day, which is really will piss you off. But when it finally happened, there are only 2 instances where I can remember getting emotional or really feeling something. Was the second time they called me saying like, hey, we've got one for you. And that was the day I was quitting my job. I got a better job with a better starting salary. And I was like, okay, cool. I just expedited like my offloading process. I get the call and I'm like, see ya. And there's this 45-minute drive from my house to my work because I've been with my parents since this whole mess started.
Yeah.
And I'm just like repeating the Lord's Prayer over and over again and just like crying as I'm streaking down I-75 at like 80 miles an hour, trying to like get my bag and like go with my dad to the hospital. But then after that, there's this serene sense of calm as you wait, because like I've already been through this like process before. I know what happens. But even, after the surgery and you wake up the next morning, they're like, hey, everything's working. It didn't happen, right? Like I didn't feel any sense of relief or emotion. And I still haven't 5 months later. And that really gets to me because it's just like, you go through this like life-altering event, right? Like your life is no longer the same, even though you feel perfectly normal. And what happens from there is that I just, I've tried to like force myself to have like some sort of feeling, and nothing, of course, has happened. I've talked with my priest about it, but even then, right, the only time where I will get emotionally fucked up is, my kidney, due to the fact that if you ever meet me IRL, I am built like a bloody twink. And
I
and
knew
like,
it.
oh, of course, John D's favorite. And and of course, so it means I got a pediatric one. A very small child is gone, and 2 people are alive because of it, right? If not more, because of the organs. And that's the only thing that messes with me. And they tell you that, you can write a letter to the parents or to the donor family. No guarantees that they'll respond. And I think I went through maybe 4 or 5 drafts. And I think like the first 4 were just trying to explain to these people, because you can't give your name or any real personal information. Just like, hey, he or she, didn't die in vain, like trying to justify my existence and my life to these like total strangers. And I even to this day, and I think post transplant, I have never been more sullen, morose, and depressed than I ever have been before, because I told myself throughout the entire year and some change of waiting that I was going to do all these things once I got quote back to normal. I was planning. I go to the gym, but I can't lift due to the fact that I have a fistula in my arm that would break if I were to go over a certain weight limit. And I wanted to do more about getting myself into a financial situation to buy property and to get settled down, because I live out in the country. Like, there's still land up here. And here I am, like 5 months out, and I'm slaving away at this job that I do enjoy because it's relatively easy to do and it's not, killing at me. But the thing that bothers me is it's just like, well, I'm paying off medical bills and I can't lift. So my desire to just turn into this ripped, person is just not happening. And for some reason, I'm getting bogged up in these materialist things, which is something that I usually will rail on about, right? And it's weird because I usually go to like Vespers on Saturdays, and I'll go to Divine Liturgy on Sunday. And I think the only thing that kind of keeps me relatively like anchored, right, is sort of the Byzantine concept of theosis. Not the idea of theology in the traditional academic sense, but rather that things are revealed to you, or that you think about it and you pray on it, and you hopefully feel sort of like God run through you in the way that Catholics with how Catholicism, I know that in Catholic theology, the idea that a convert cannot truly, convert to the church until they feel the Holy Spirit move within them. And
but of course, like in recent times, unfortunately, that's been sort of like played down on, if you could, that's a word. Converts are sort of like treated a bit more with kid gloves. But no, it's funny. I have a point about the revealing part in theosis, because that's very interesting. I wanted to bring up what Heidegger said about anxiety, but no, go on. I'm interested. So how did you develop a fistula in your arm though? Like what part?
Oh, well,
was it?
I got it as a backup. So there are 2 ways to do hemodialysis. You can get like a port in one of your main lines, which they don't want to stay in forever because they'll stop working.
Yeah,
and
they get clogged.
They get clogged. So of course they connect a vein and an artery in one of your arms, and that's how it works. So that's what most people will use, right? I got lucky because I was thin, and they called me like responsible enough to do what's called peritoneal dialysis, where they literally fill up this cavity in between your organs with this giant sugar solution to pull all the crap out and then put it in a bag, which was a lot better because hemo is, 3 days out of your week where you're sitting there for 4 hours not really doing anything. But I got it as a backup because the first time we tried PD, I got a post-op infection and I almost died like a week later. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. They didn't know what the hell was wrong.
Did you contract like MRSA or some other like hospital, like lithogenic pathogen?
They whatever it was, they said when they opened up the cavity, right, that like the area, the site was clogged, it was full of pus, and oh, by the way, it was also infecting your appendix. So it was either the worst timed case of appendicitis ever or something else that happened. But my insurance was like, someone is to blame, and I'm like, well, nobody is to blame. Like, I can't blame the surgeon. And they're like, well, we need to pay out this like $185,000, and I'm like, well, it's nobody's fault, so go please pay it out.
Yeah, the appendix.
But that's how I ended up with it.
It can get aggravated by either previous infection. There's some cases of appendicitis that are like slow growing. I mean, it's rare, but I guess maybe your body was taxed to begin with, so it was kind of like an infection of opportunity. Like I have family members who are like nurses. Like my grandmother was a head nurse, like way back in the day, and things were different. Like nowadays, the stuff that they get away with is like ridiculous compared to what, like, this was, pre-antibiotics when she got her medical degree. But yeah, so then you went through infections and everything, and your body's already like isn't receiving proper nutrients to begin with. And man, so then what happened? Then you said you had a false
Well, it was
like
2 weeks
a
in the
donor,
hospital.
or
Well, yeah, so it was like 2 weeks in the hospital, and this was around the end of August of last year in 2020, the first week in September.
yeah.
And then I recover slowly but surely, and we try it again in, I think, like the end of November. And I just told the surgeon, who would later be the same woman that did my transplant, I just told her, listen, I'm not doing this again without a backup to know that, I can still get treatment, because there's no way in hell I'm going to take this port out one day, and if this thing doesn't work, then no thanks.
Yeah.
And she put both in, and everything was fine. Although I knew already what the PD thing looked like. I didn't know anything about the fistula, and I like kind of was just like, all right, it's a day surgery. You can go home now. We're going to wheel you out of here. And just with not a lot of instruction about the use of my hand, except for like Steele syndrome. And that was in November. I got on the list at the same time. But it was near I want to say the end of February. I did a whole video on this talking about it. But I get a call saying like, hey, like, we've got one for you. And here's the most morbid 2-for-1 special that you could ever possibly get. And we go in the middle of the night, where we're booking it down the highway to get there to Dallas, because we're about an hour and a half away from it. Yeah. And what happens is that, we're waiting, and I wait all bloody night. And it's sometime in the morning where we're told, hey, they weren't good in transportation. They're not going to be viable. So we're really sorry, but you can go home now. And that was it. And I've been told that this happens a lot, like a very common thing, especially with like stuff that's out of state transportation that's in network.
Yeah,
but
sometimes it gets lost, or
or there's damage, and I mean, like, but I wasn't mad either. Like, I was just like, okay, I've been told to fast and not drink anything for like the last like 18 hours. I'd really like to go home or just eat something. I don't think I got upset. Like, there was like 5 seconds of disappointment, and then I was like, nah, it's way too soon since being put on the list. Let's just go get some freaking chicken from Cane's and go home. And that was it. Like, let's just make this stupid 90-minute drive home, and we'll just resume with our days. But yeah, like that's how it went the first time.
Was it because you felt that, like, not to belittle, but like it was just, oh, it's my kidney. It's not like a heart where it's like I could die. Or did they say to you like it obviously is a life-threatening condition, but you would have been able to stay on dialysis?
Oh yeah, I had never gotten to the point where they're like, hey, it's not working anymore. And I also
like terminal people have that.
And I had gotten to, and I had been told like, hey, you can be on dialysis for like decades, because they've got people like that. And I guess it didn't bother me so much because of that, but also I sort of like posed my youthful veil of invincibility that you have in your 20s, right?
Yeah.
And when I got the news, like, one, I already knew that this was going to happen eventually. And how they explained it to me, I was like, okay, you just go to treatment 3 times a week, you change your diet, you don't drink as much, you take some pills, and your life is relatively normal. And I was like, well, fuck, I could do this. I'm not too worried. In fact, I'll probably be healthier out of all of this than ever before, because you have to stop eating certain junk and things like that. And so I was like, I don't know. I think I'll be okay. So I was like, well, I'm still on dialysis. Everything's working. I'm not upset. Like, yeah, I guess I'll be all right. And that was sort of my thought process. And now that I'm past all that, right, like the thing that affects my memory or the way I behave and the way that I look at the world is like, okay, you've met death or have been very close to meeting him 3 times now in like the last 14 months. And this is on top of the fact that you have this COVID business going on. And I just think to myself, I should probably take things a little more seriously. And so throughout my time in the hospitals and my time with like clinics and things like that, that's when I started getting a lot more invested in getting good with my creator in case something were to happen.
Yeah, that'll put it in you. I think it's very interesting, like the idea, like especially for younger people who are going through like a terminal case of something. It's like you can't imagine like that the weight of your own like mortality at such a young age. Like I think about that too, like if you the experiences that or lack thereof in your life, you know what I mean? Like is there ever a time when anyone apart from maybe someone who is of a more um has more of an what's the word equanimity has more of like a mind of contentment, someone who is like I think the only contentment that can be brought about by experience and by a certain faith and or a certain wisdom. But for young people to get clipped at that age, you know, apart from what used to constitute a ritual of, you know, like, because like let's face it, the vast majority of men throughout human history like either died in war or some other endeavor of that sort. But to sort of be clipped at such a young age by an illness, I would imagine that that probably is the number one frustration, is just the lack of it's very odd when it's almost like, to make a comparison in terms of something like less dramatic and severe, would be, I think a lot of people nowadays in the West, like young men in particular, I think there's sort of this mood among us, you know, millennials and Zoomers or whatever, of certain like milestones being deferred or almost becoming impossible in certain ways. And even though what's sold to us is like the idea of like adolescence forever, like that cusp between like adulthood and childhood, it's like really that's a trap, right? But if you're someone that is it's taken out at such an early age, I think like you worry about the possibilities, but it's almost as like that's a part of the sort of death culture that we live in now, is that the thing that is like the horror of horrors, to not fully realize your potential. Now that is like almost sold and marketed to us as like, you know what I mean? Like that's the cultural zeitgeist, if you will, is
Well,
like
no, I agree with
adolescence.
you, because everything nowadays, and I think that this is in part due to like some of the faults of like democracy, in the way that like every election, you know, there's this like secular eschatology about how this is the
Yeah.
one where everything goes to hell if we don't win.
Well, in
But at this,
America, not where
well,
I'm from,
well, I don't know
but
how it is.
yeah,
Well, you know, in the first
yeah,
post-national country, I'm sure politics are different, but at
that's
least in
all
the
sorted
United
out.
States, right? It's like that. But at the same time, everything is about how tonight's the night, and it's sort of this hedonistic like,
Mm.
and you hear this a lot, and the worst example is Mr. Worldwide. You know, you hear this in almost every bloody Pitbull song from, you know, ad infinitum that he's ever done, where
Yeah.
tonight is the night, you have to go out and you have to like find somebody that, you know, can just get you going and, you know, enjoy it, because this is it, right? And don't think about tomorrow in any way whatsoever. And I think that that's one of the biggest problems that we face, because, you know, like C.S. Lewis writes in The Abolition of Man, is that we are literally doing everything in like our education and our culture and our society to erase the traditional definition of like the Western masculine man.
Yeah.
And when that happens, right, here we are in this perpetual adolescence. And there's like, you know, not to mention like, you know, endocrine disruptors, microplastics, things that affect with our development,
Oh
where
yeah.
like
Yeah.
men are far more neotenous and things like that. But
Oh, but apparently Nyani's sexy. Don't you realize, according to the people that are ratioing our friend Memory Girl a few months ago? So, um, yeah, no. But it's like, do you know that Catholic saint? I think he was canonized recently. He was, I want to say 18 years old. He died
oh,
of
the child.
cancer. Yeah. He died of cancer, and he's become like the symbol of like Catholic Zoomers everywhere, which I think is like good. I mean, he generally has. I think they gave it to him because he was helping other kids with cancer. I forget. I have to look up his name, but like,
Go on, I'll go on.
yeah, look it up for me. Yeah. It's it's funny, like in a way. It's like, yeah, he was a pious gamer, like that's the meme, right? But if you were to like pick apart that meme, in a one sense it's like a bittersweet sort of thing. In the one sense, it's like he gets to fulfill this let's say cultural archetype forever, right? Like his life I'm sure he's looking down upon us in heaven, but in another sense, it's sad because he would have been someone who was, I would think, really a great man of history if he were, to live past the age that he was unfortunately, taken back to the Lord's kingdom. I wonder, so it's like this weird, I think, polarity with a lot of when you examine like your own mortality, either through illness or through some other circumstance. It's very interesting. But so yeah, have you found info on
Carlo Acutis, he died of leukemia in 2006 at the age of 15.
Oh, 15. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, he, like other boys his age. I'm reading off of the conference. Actually, I'll just screen share it so everyone else can see, because I'm sure, as much as we love Pepe, I'll just
yeah.
There we go. I wanted something a little white pilling for today, but yeah. So this is from the conversation. Acutis died of leukemia in 2006 at the age of 15, and like other boys his age, he was avidly interested in computers, video games, and the internet, but he was also a devout Catholic who went to Mass daily and persuaded his mother as well to be a regular attendee. One of his pet projects was designing a web page listing miracles around the globe associated with the bread and wine consecrated at Mass, believed by Catholics to be the body and blood of Christ. And after his death, townspeople began to attribute miracles to his intercession, including the birth of twins to his own mother 4 years after his death. So yeah, wow. I could see why a lot of Zoomer Catholics would be, that he would sort of be the guy.
He played like PlayStation 2, if I recall. Like that was his thing. But he would have been like a top software developer or something. Who knows, right? We don't know. I mean, I personally think I would trade him for all of the heads of tech companies in Silicon Valley, to tell you the truth. Obviously.
Of course.
But I think it's very interesting how our relation to, and I know this is like an argument people have been making since around the 80s or 90s when Ernst Becker came out with his book, Death Denial. But it is very interesting how I think there was a Jeffrey Schollenberger talk about this too, but because of course we were covering the whole sacrament issue, and with the Backstreet Boys World Tour, if you know what I mean, live in China, about the writings of Giorgio Agamben. And he had a podcast on it. And I was on his podcast. I was talking about Francis E. Deck. But it's funny how for the longest time, Western culture, North American culture in particular, for a variety of reasons, maybe the lack of history, the way that Europeans experience it, maybe it's because of the sort of fabulation of all culture in North America. But for the longest time, it's like death denial has been the primary mode of expression in terms of like how we even view, like not just expression, but like in terms of how we view ourselves. It seems that either death is irrelevant, it's something that we can pathologize, or it's something that we are hidden from at all costs, but except for like very cheap and cynical forms of entertainment. And there was this great passage by the philosopher who wrote Psychopolitics, Byung-Chul Han, in his book, I have it here, the Scent of Time. He talks about the non-time of, well, he was referring to boomers in particular, actually. So it's pretty based. He said that because our lives no longer have a lot of milestones that are meaningful, because we no longer have sort of a consciousness of what Heidegger would call being towards death. And of course, like Chilhan is a Heidegger scholar. It's like death comes abruptly and it comes like fast, and just get rid of it, get out of sight, out of mind, go to the funeral parlor, that's it, go into the incinerator. It's like there is no longer sort of a preparation the way that even like the most direct of our ancestors experienced it. And it's very interesting from that lens, because nowadays with the whole Backstreet Boys World Tour live in China, it seems that death and mortality is reintroduced, but in a way that can be like handled for like the mass, propagandized visual. Like death, not only is death just a statistic, but the statistics are the means by which we can quote unquote conquer death. If we just have more and more sacraments, if we just like do the fucking Resident Evil take our children, stick them in the face with sacraments, like if we just keep, if we suspend the means by which we live itself, then we can conquer death, which is like quite fitting. I think that's why Hulbeck said that it's like an acceleration of what's already happening. But it is funny because when you think of chronic illness and you think of medical resources and you think of just how terminally fucked our healthcare systems are, either here in Canada or your guys in America or elsewhere, it's really interesting how those are the people that sort of get sidelined the most for this, not to like say it's not real and people haven't died, but like this sort of media spectacle, the people that have things like cancer or have things like what you went through with kidney failure or other chronic conditions that require immense amount of resources within hospitals themselves, those are the people that are sort of sidelined. Those are the people that have to suffer the most. But the way that they play it is like, well, they're suffering because you're selfish and you don't believe in science and all of that crap. So it's not that you've not invested enough in the system itself. It's not that you've created an apparatus of total paranoia and scapegoating, the likes of which Girard would never have predicted. It's not that. It's like the people, it's the homo sacer that you have to persecute, that is outside of the framework of the law. And you have to oppress and say that, well, the reason that, this population that's 90% sacramented has like almost the same rates of hospitalization as last year. It's like, well, that's because the 7% that, refuse the sacrament. So, but anyways, that's just trailing off. I think it's very interesting how people like the more, I think the more meaningful point is that people who live with chronic illnesses, I think like there's not just ignorance, there's sort of like a sidelining of it. It's like any sort of critical theory medical researcher, which I mean, a lot of it's bullshit, but like the stuff that is good, it is true that people who have certain conditions are sort of shuttered off from public view because they're very intensely private things apart from when you have to experience medical intervention. It's always like a very weird liminality between what is private and what is like almost like voyeuristic in a way. My father described it, like he went through a bout of diverticulitis through a whole summer. Like he had to get surgery and everything. And it's funny you mentioned a fistula because he had a fistula in his gut to his bladder and it was terrible. And he said like, it's weird when you're in the hospital and you just like, and they fucked up his medication too. They gave him an epidural instead of like Demerol. So like he could feel everything. Right. And these fucking nurses, like some of them are just totally incompetent. And he had this fucking student anesthesiologist, like terrible, right? So he's like, you realize when you're in that state of total vulnerability in like a medical setting, it's like you almost don't care anymore about your own humanity. It's like you are the patient, like you are like, the Foucauldian, like you are the docile body sort of deal, Anyways, sorry to cut you off, but you know more about this, obviously. So,
well, no, what I was gonna say is that I think because we make it so private, right?
Yeah.
Is that what happens is you end up becoming two people, right? Is that you either totally ignore it, disregard it, and try to put it in the periphery, or out of morbid curiosity, you seek it out. And I think for a lot of like millennials and Zoomers, when Live Leak was still around, what were people watching? You were watching Syrian war videos of people getting sniped somewhere by Al-Assad's troops, or you were watching cartels do the worst possible aspects of humanity ever to people in Mexico.
And you see the chainsaw video?
Oh yeah, of course I have. And that's where
like the guy next to him, that's what creeps you out.
Oh, absolutely.
The guy's waiting. He's waiting for his fate, but he's looking off. I remember this one YouTuber, I'm not going to mention his name. He came up last stream because it might get me in trouble. But just like he's a very filthy YouTuber, if people know what I mean. He's like he talked about this African tiring video he saw in Live Leaks where
oh god, yeah,
the guy's looking off. And he's like, he kept describing, he's looking off into nothingness. And he's just staring there. Like it's like the guy in the Mexican chainsaw video. It's like he's looking off. He knows that's coming, very fairly quickly. But it seems that
He wants to avoid it for one last time.
Exactly. But in that moment, it's almost like it's not necessarily you make peace of it, but it's not like what Hollywood makes it out to be. It's not this dramatic, like flailing and gnashing of teeth. It's almost as if that resignation is more brutal than what any like fucking slasher. Like who's a good slasher? Like oh god, I'm trying to think. Eli Roth, like any Eli Roth film or any like.
Oh yeah, none of them get it close. I think the closest thing that is remotely like of resignation is maybe the one scene in Breaking Bad of all television shows where Hank goes, "Dude, I'm already dead. Like I know what my fate is," and he's sort of just resigned to it because he knows what's happening.
Yeah.
But what I was going with that is that you have those two divisions, is where you either go off into the path where you purposefully seek it out to know what's been avoided, sort of like this forbidden Faustian knowledge that has been denied to you by this sort of modernist society. But at the same time, you have people that openly want to avoid it. And they wish to engage and put it on the periphery. And that's what makes, I think, transhumanism so appealing, which I'm talking about in my Friday video, where I'm going to go a little schizo posting. We do a little schizo posting. But at the same time, right, we try to make it look like we have defeated death. And we'll always cite medical stories. We'll always do these GoFundMe campaigns. We're like, look, these kids beat cancer. It's always the good. And it's never the reality that sometimes biology fails and you pass on. Or, something terrible happens, like an accident or a murder, and you die. And I had this image for this that I want to bring up, because I think the idea that we wish to escape to cyberspace or engage in sort of this alternate reality, or even an augmented one, is quite plainly clear when we talk about like celebrity. Celebrities don't die anymore. And what a better example than what's been recently happening here, whether it's with Michael Jackson. I think they've done Buddy Holly, and of course Tupac.
George Floyd.
I'm sure he's next.
No, they did the hologram.
Oh, they did? I didn't know that. Wow. Well, that doesn't surprise me. But, you can't. This is what people do. They're like, wow, like, no one dies anymore, even if they're actually dead and buried in the ground or in a vase somewhere. Like, they're not gone. And we always try to perpetuate this idea. But at the same time, right, our society becomes really hyper-focused on tragedy. And I think it's sort of like misery porn, but it's always about like let's pull your bloody heartstrings out, because death is very real, but at the same time we don't want you to think about it in a way where it'll happen to you. And even when you take a look, and I don't know how television commercials are up in Canada, but in the United States, right, depending on where the programming is or what channel it is, there's a lot of emphasis on like life insurance. And,
same.
And it's always in sort of this uplifting kind of like, well, you won't have to worry about me when I'm gone. And it's the most fucking dehumanizing thing ever.
Yeah.
Like, this person lived a full life, and the only way that we're going to think about them is that, they signed onto this policy when they were like 65, so I don't have to pay any money out of cost when grandma dies. And to me, that is just the most disgusting, dehumanizing thing. It deracinates you from like the humanity that you were innately born with, to your connection with blood relatives. And it's just absolutely awful. And you see this on mainstream television all the time, especially in like Fox News or MSNBC, because the median viewer age for both of those channels is like 70 something.
God.
And I mean, and everyone's just like, oh my gosh, Tucker Carlson's doing so great in the ratings. But it's a bunch of 78-year-old boomers like calm the fuck down.
It's probably like the age of the Fox viewership lowers significantly as soon as Tucker Carlson goes on. That's pretty much it. As soon as Sean Hannity goes back on, it's like it boosts up to like 70, 80. That's 50, 60, 70. Casting shade on Sean Hannity.
He deserves it. It's fine. He gets Lindsey Graham on Sean Hannity. He deserves to get all the flack that he does.
The wall banger, as Savage called him.
Yeah. But like, I think that this sort of brings us to that desire to like escape to the cyberspace. And my good friend Skeptical Waves, who does audiobooks for like with a really good text to speech for sort of like dissident literature, I paid him some money for a while now to like put up Nick Land's Meltdown, because I love slam poetry. And And the thing about it, right, is that I like looking back, and it's like by 1994, like this guy's I listened to it today on my like way to lunch, and I was like, man, there's a lot of things in here that make a lot of sense. This desire to not be human anymore, this desire to become something that is not in the world as we become increasingly aware that our real world environment is destroyed and
Yeah.
the world around us sucks. So let's escape. Even today, Facebook, the Meta or whatever they want to call themselves, they're talking about metaverse real estate. We are trying to completely defy the biological, defy the world around us, avoid the crappy pain of our own real world, and become a literal body without organs and escape to somewhere else. And sort of this like rhizomatic branching out and understanding that this is the world around us. And I'm like, God bless, for 1994, he got a lot of shit right. And I just find that absolutely terrifying that we are, as human beings, so absolutely terrified of the basic reality that, hey, we die. And I think that a really good parallel to this, and I think that you might agree here, if not, is that we kind of see this where the sort of girl boss culture, I hate the phrase the wall, but like eventually you hit something, right? Where like you're kind of aware that like, oh, me becoming a girl boss, me listening to Sheryl Sandberg and leaning in has a consequence when the eggs I froze like 10 to 15 years ago aren't viable. I'm, not married. Like all the biological essences kick in, and men experiences these too. This is not explicitly a women problem, chat, either. Like, I'm 25 years old. I turn 26 next month, and the baby fever is very fucking real. Bro, the idea that I want to be a dad or like married it drives you nuts. And
were you December you December baby?
I was born on December 23rd, so very December baby.
Fuck! Oh, bro! I'm born fucking December 23rd. Holy shit! Holy fuck!
Well, there you go.
What?
Well, you're invited to the birthday stream, Gio.
It's in my for people. It's in my Twitter. I'm pretty easy to dox. No, I was supposed to be born in January, but the thing is, like being born like a few weeks premature, I think it like kind of set the course for my life. I could get into a little bit, like just really quickly.
Oh, go for it.
Because I was put in because of all my father's friends who had kids. I was put in the grade with all the 1992 kids. So if I were to have been in the grade from 93, I would have been like the oldest kid, and maybe that would have done something different. But like because I was the youngest kid in my grade, and I had like, they said I had certain learning disabilities. I was kind of like the opposite of gifted child. I was like written off by everyone. And I had to like go to like the resource room and shit. And I struggled to find, like I was always delayed in everything. Like it took me like a bit longer to reach pretty much every milestone, which is again something that's still going on. And so, but then when I got to high school, shit, like a switch flipped, and then maybe it's because they didn't understand me, because like I was very much like everything was in my mind a lot. Like they had, like the school system, they probably fucked me over too, because they would give me a student teacher to scribe for me, because I would never like want to write things down. Now I have to like force myself to write things down. So like I had other things too. Like there's still some things I'm terrible at, like math. I'm pretty much like numbers dyslexic, but I just like my whole course of my life was pretty much set by the fact that I was placed in the 92 class. So yeah, that's pretty much like when I went to high school, I started off in Canada. They have 3 levels. In fact, no, actually they got rid of it recently. This year, they got rid of it. I'll tell you why. So they had like an academic, local, applied, and locally developed. Locally developed is like, I don't want to say it, like short bus kids, right? Like, so they put me in the absolute bottom in the beginning, because that was what my elementary school recommended. Because like they thought I was like, done for, right, in elementary. Because that's the problem when you're like with the same people for a long time, since like you're a little kid till when you're adolescent. It's like people, they hear rumors and stuff, and it's sort of like they judge you. But like as soon as you go to high school, that just falls apart, right? So they're like, yeah.
I couldn't relate to you. I'm sort of a rootless cosmopolitan. I would move every 3 years because my dad was in the army. So
Yeah,
what I loved about it, right, was like, oh, if I do badly here, I don't have to
you
worry
could
about it
just
in like a year because I'll be gone and I can totally reinvent myself.
you just
Look
reinvent
back at all of
yourself.
like the cringe I did and just be like, okay,
Mm.
don't do any of that shit. Do something
Yeah,
else.
it's not like being a prisoner. Like you go to a different yard and like guys have kites on you already. It's not like that. Um, so like in high school, they're like, oh yeah, like he doesn't belong here, but we got to keep him the first year, blah blah blah, because he's helping the other kids. And so I had to like basically do everything like twice over a lot. So I had to stay for an extra year, which is kind of like they used to have it when my cousins who were all like Gen Xers, they used to have grade 13, right? But they called it grade 12B when I went. And I think that's good because like I truly believe that that year makes a difference and we shouldn't be sending 17-year-olds to fucking university in my opinion. But so like they got rid of this system recently for grade 9 in Ontario where I'm from because the it's targeting ethnic minorities to place them because not a lot of them go in the academic so it's racist. That's why Doug Ford was urged to get rid of the system. So, oh, so anyways, yeah, go. So you were describing about what were we talking about? Transhumanism, right?
Yeah.
Well,
Go
no,
on.
go ahead.
Oh, well, no. And I think because of that, right? Like, people are kind of acknowledging that this, I think maybe slightly, and this is where you'll see people like default friend Catherine D, right, talk about sort of the backlash against sex positivity,
She may
where
be in the chat, by the way.
she
She may
what?
be listening to this right
Oh,
now.
well, I mean, I think that she has a very good point where people are sort of acknowledging the backlash to it. And I think that also
Yeah,
comes with it with a sense of biology, right? Where we'll talk about certain things to be about the idea where, oh, like even with like certain individuals that detransition, they're like, hey, I've been on hormones for X number of years, and all I want more is to like be a stay-at-home mom. And there's that acknowledgement of biological reality that comes in. And
yeah,
you're when you're confronted with that, right, there are two things that happen. You either acknowledge it, right, and you do something about it, or B, you double down on the illusion and
yeah,
you
yeah.
try your best to escape, which is why I think you'll see people like, oh God, what's her name? Like Jardin something, the tech journalist, where she's like
Oh,
in her 40s, but she's got the bright dyed pink hair and the problematic glasses. And it's the doubling down of that complete
yeah.
reality aspect.
I think like well, according to our good friend on Twitter, being a stay-at-home mom is actually not great. Um, I don't know why people are so upset at Radfem Hitler. She was always nice to me. I don't know why. I think she knows.
There's your problem.
Yeah, well, I think she knows how to piss people off. And like, anyways, I think like it's funny how it seems that like on our corner of things, people talk about this, but I actually went through when I was in poli sci, my grad program, the theory aspect was very heavily had an actual like post-humanist studies group or whatever. My professor, my supervisor was like that was his thing that he was into or getting into. And so I like am intimately acquainted with a lot of the literature, you could say. I know that Keith Woods has that good video on transhumanism and certain people, the Jesuits. So no, but anyways, that's just I think like there's this great article that came out recently by the art critic Dean Kissick. If you go to his Twitter, it talks about how in a certain period and from the 90s to the 2000s in the work of art, but also in like these philosophy departments, you had like a lot of discourse around like post-humanism and post-internet art and how the body, I think if I recall reading the article, he said like the hope was that identity wasn't something that would Deleuze would call like a molar sort of thing. And by the way, I have a problem with like just because I don't think Deleuze really like meant it as like a physical like you download into a machine, like as much as some people like theory cells that read him want it to be. It's not, it's more complicated than that. But so it's like identity becomes no longer something that is attached to you, even the way that like woke people would talk about identity as a mix of construction and essentialism, but identity is now something that is acted upon at the site of it through digital technology, through the aesthetics of the self in like, hypermodernity, let's call it. And that's like the dream, is that, the identity is something that is so thoroughly shot through with choice and personal agency that it really is like the perfect sort of like Hegelian quest for recognition finally realized. But really, like, the problem is that there are systems just natural to, let's call it the world system, the world spirit, that don't allow for this, in my opinion. I think that sort of level of human agency, that sort of Gnostic level of identity being enacted at sight rather than something that you're born with and something that is a bricolage that is developed over time. I think like that is something that is beyond our like human capacity. It's beyond the capacity of the earth, certainly, unless we have, some form of free energy or whatever. Like, I don't know. I think that there's just like too much emphasis, I think, on that very like, terminally liberal notion of the self is now something that transcends both mortality and the conditions of the earth. Like the fact that Tupac Shakur can like tour around the earth in hologram form, I think like it's very interesting how we're creating like new archons as we're going. Like I have this, I think I tweeted this, or should tweet this, where I said like they should go to the field in Rome, New York, and they should have like a huge hologram apparatus where they hologram the entirety of Woodstock 99, and they do it just to cancel DMX posthumously. So the DMX live set from Woodstock 99 is recreated so they could cancel him for getting white kids to say the N-word. So that's my theory.
But no, I think the other thing, on the other side of that, right, is that this liberal notion, or even just this highly, the individual transcends mortality.
Right.
And I think, but it's never you who has that agency, right? It is always somebody else that will determine whether or not your individual self becomes, posthumously recognized to live
exactly.
on. But what's even worse, though, right, is that we are using what available technology there is to stop, to not let someone else do it. Like, you can do it yourself, or you can agree to have somebody do it for you. And the thing that immediately came to mind was this article from the New York Post about using like GTP3 to, recreate his dead girlfriend. And,
I think I heard of that. Yeah, terribly ghoulish.
But it is ghoulish. Like, you can't let people die. And that was the one thing that made...
she becomes a slave to your own ego forever.
Well, exactly. And she's not, and it's not even her, right? You are creating a simulacra of her soul in order to keep her around for your own needs. And I'm doing a movie review script. I know I'm going to be one of those guys, but I'm talking about the movie Her, right? Where Joaquin Phoenix gets the Scarlett Johansson AI and he falls in love with her. And this came out in 2013, and I'm like, this is the perfect Bugman dystopia. He has this job where he writes fake letters and cards for people that want to imitate themselves, so they pay somebody else to do it. He has these very drab pastel colors. It's all very fake and gay. And he falls in love with this, AI. And
it's terminally millennial, too.
It's very, 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 very millennial.
My buddy
this reminds me of it because you have two things. This... and then the AI girlfriend thing in China with like 30 million people who were like listening to it.
Yeah.
And we're points where like men are ready to jump off of bridges and they'll talk to the AI and it's like, well, you'll lose me. And it's like, she's not real, but men will stop. They won't commit suicide because of her. And to me, it's
so fucked because me personally, not that I'm a stone's throw away from that, but like, I couldn't put it this way without getting too graphic. I can sort of understand that mindset. Not like that, but like I can understand what desperation does to a Nibba, like I think I can sort of see where the hikikomori like crisis is heading. But ironically enough, in Japan, almost equal number of women are also hikikomoris, but that's just because like apparently Japanese women are like terminally picky. I don't know.
I'm not familiar with the term. If you could enlighten me in the chat.
Hikikomori is the herbivores or grass eaters. That's basically like Japan, they have and I think certain parts of China, they have a way more developed form of NEET culture. Hikikomoris are like basically NEETs that, and there's this great book called, I think, Hikikomori's Adolescence Forever or something. And they're basically like shut-ins, and they usually work like off-site coding tech jobs, or they like don't work at all. They live off their parents' inheritance, and like they're like the ultimate like NEET beta gamma shut-in.
Yeah, Dave says shut-ins.
Yeah, so in Japan they have like they have like a way more sophisticated and nuanced like culture of NEETs, and it's deeply tied with like otaku culture and things like that. Whereas in the West, it's like we're starting to break out of, which I think is in some ways positive. It's of course horrendously negative. The sort of like Protestant work ethic, terminal like North American mindset, grind set. So you were saying like about the AI girlfriend. I managed to find the article it's from Spike Art magazine. It's called The Downward Spiral, part 2 by Dean Kissick, part 2. In this one passage, he says, so quoting like post-internet art, here again, the body was appropriated as raw material, no longer a container for identity, but rather a jump-off point. The underlying idea was that our fluid identities demand fluid representations, untethered by the physical body, which was to express our true selves. Identity would become an idol we sculpt afresh each morning from the digital clay. And this also was the more recently promised by Meta, the campaign video for which shows the Zucker face, which shows a cabaret entertainer, a Thule's the Trek star from the corporate metaverse. Oh God, terrible what they done to my incel boy, Thule's the Trek. Putting on makeup, a blue dress, and a gold crown, asking us to imagine a world where we are represented the way we want to be. There are no more faces. There's no more Facebook, only Meta, the lands of masks, which reveal the authentic you we're told. And it does already sometimes feel like the characters we play are more real than people grew up as. And some of us do feel trapped in our bodies and in the world. So it's funny he's mentioning, of course, because Dean Kissick is a very well-regarded art critic and he knows this stuff, it's funny because Thule's the Trek also, in certain paintings like Night of the Moulin Rouge, would paint like these very garish, almost like mask-like faces. And there was even a lot of symbolist painters or German expressionists that would paint women and people like citizens of the city, these urban sprawls as like wearing masks down the street. And it's because, to quote the art critic Robert Hughes, he understood that in the future or in the direct present with like terminal urbanization, there is like this aesthetic pull towards the mask in a more of like a metaphorical Jungian sense of now the mask becomes the total of that person's visage and identity. And it's very interesting how the Facebook ad will use him or the painter Russo to make these like kitschy tigers come to life. My one mutual said to me, he's like, on Twitter, I retweeted it. He said, it's almost like they're animated against their will in that metaverse ad, which I find like tragicomic in such a way that these animals, they're tortured by their own virtual AI existence. They were perfectly happy to be painted by Rousseau, the painter, but yet in this weird, hyper-real digital slavery serfdom, they have to be animated for a kitschy Facebook ad to sell us on the idea of AI and like living through the mask, which I find crazy.
No, that's perfect though, right? Because just to reference the video that's coming out Friday on my end, is just that the difference, right, between like the metaverse and those kitschy, like hyper real depictions of the self that are meant to be like the true you, is that it's the total like opposite and inverse of what you would see in any sort of like VR chat server.
Yeah.
Where it can be anything from like Dr. Kleiner from Half-Life to like Kermit the Frog twerking, like all of these things that'll happen. And that's where people kind of get to talk about themselves because there's that veil of anonymity.
Yeah.
And not just on VR chat, it happens here. I know that you're far more like doxed and your name is out there and you have your own artwork, which is good. But for those of us like myself who are, hiding behind a veil, there's always this idea about, well, I can finally like speak my mind, or I can finally escape and offer an opinion, or do art and talk about what you want to do. And it's almost like this sort of Faustian bargain where I will live on here and I will continue to be my actual authentic self whilst sacrificing who I am in the real world, because myself and millions of others are screaming into this void. But the void is not silent. The void is filled with a million other voices that are all screaming at 120 decibels as loud as they possibly can, hoping that somebody on the other side of that void might hear themselves.
Yeah, like listening to a Bethlehem album, the black metal band. Yeah.
But yeah, and you're trying to, this is where you'll be conscious. Even in political commentary, you kind of see it and you kind of hear it, because there'll be honest expressions of, people being black-pilled, or honest expressions of, their faith or what they do. And people are far more militant about their faith, I think, when they're, anonymously, because it's a place to escape from the real world. So we sort of transfer our consciousness, even politically, in our spheres of conversation, into this sort of digital space. But as I've talked about in a Substack post about sort of finding meaning among ruin, I hate the fact that the words touch grass are treated as a slur, or treated as with like an insulting frame, or an ironic frame. Because if you were, what separates yourself and the idea of the pain around the world that you live in is that you chose to double down and escape and be online, and you have done nothing to generate an authentic soul or an authentic self. You are not taking, or in like my instance, right? Like there's this idea of like, you're not taking the steps to be closer to God. You're not trying to be, to suffer or to undergo these burdens in real life. You are objecting to theology. You're objecting to theosis. You're objecting any sort of teleological connection to what makes you human. And, you will revile when somebody tells you to touch grass and go outside. And, they're like, well, they're just telling me to shut up. They're just telling me to not look at my argument, right? And
what it mostly is when it,
which is what it mostly
by
is.
certain people.
And I think what it should be, right, is that it should be the opposite of that. It should be, listen, while Twitter is not technically real life, we know that the discourse around Twitter and Tumblr have infected the real world. But I think if you were to disconnect yourself for a moment, right, and take a look at outside your window, or the greenery, or the actual part of what makes us human, right, is our connection. And in the Christian sense, we are supposed to be like sort of the masters of the domain of the natural world. And like, to me, like, I go fishing and I do fishing videos on this channel, and I love doing that, even though they're not the most popular content that I do. I love doing it because it is a way for me to turn everything off, and I have my fishing reel, and I can cast out. And even if I don't catch anything, I can be out there for 3 hours. I can hear the sounds of nature and know that there's a very real world out there that's worth preserving. And I can ignore sort of the trauma / psychic pain that exists out there online, or taking a look at my news feed or the headlines. And I can acknowledge that there is something greater out there. There's this bounty in front of me. And that sticks in my consciousness, because I'll listen to people that I've talked to who don't do these sort of things. And it always upsets me. Like, for instance, I had a conversation with, like, I was on Academic Agent's channel, and I was on an episode of Unpopular Opinions, and lo and behold, I was a panelist next to Sargon of Akkad, of all people, which is weird to think about. I was like, oh, I listened to him in college, and like here I am now being a panelist next to him, as and my channel's only existed for like a year and some change. But like, somebody asked me, well, like, how's the fishing? And I said, oh, I love doing it. And he's like, oh, I don't like it. And I said, well, what do you don't get? And he's like, I don't get the appeal of it. And I sort of told him, and he's like, yeah, it's the argument I would have expected from you about being out there and enjoying the nature and the peace and the patience.
That's not the argument I would have expected from you.
Like, well, yeah, right. But it tells me a lot about how in this world our escape, or the front, right, that we call the culture war, or the front of politics, is deracinated from like the real world, right? Like it's taken away and it's disassociated. And we always talk about the online sphere. We talk about tweets. We talk about ratios. We talk about QRT threads and things like
down bad.
Yeah, down bad, or your infamous idea of simping, right?
You
said we're going to stop, so I screenshotted that and seeing how long that lasts.
That one tweet, I got fucking ratioed to oblivion by but no, it was cool. Like, I went with the flow. Like, people weren't too harsh. They were funny. Like, Keith Woods posted a funny reply, was that anime. I Hypocrite, I think, posted the most hilarious reply. But it's funny because, like, I didn't take it too, like, replied with that one screen from Barney Gumble when he did the film in the film
Yeah.
festival. No, I thought it was hilarious actually. Because it's funny because like I actually do believe that. Like I not in the sense of like, oh, how do I say this? I do like a lot of women I do see on Twitter who are faced. They are, you know, quite pretty and attractive and all that. And you know, I mean, it's nice. I think like again, this is having been in like, you know, around like the manosphere back in the day. I think the problem is like you actually do probably it's probably healthy for you to like have an honest conversation with women that aren't like have the pretension of like, you know what I mean, like any sort of where is this going, blah blah blah. But anyways, I think like it is funny how we're talking about these things in internet terms because it used to be back in the day. Now that I've mentioned post-internet art, it used to be that that was the great sort of like frontier of exploration that people were hopeful. Like I remember this one essay I read where they were talking about people doing portraits of themselves in Second Life or like an idealized portrait of themselves and how it was giving a voice to like terminally shut in people with various conditions. And like if you look at the people left in Second Life, I mean it's totally a wasteland now. And there's this other great article about digital ruins and like urban exploration within digital spaces. Like there's that worlds.com. There's whole swaths of Second Life that are like unpopulated because of like people moving on or going to VR chat or whatever. And it's funny how that sort of like world of Web 1.1, the sort of like Californian ideology optimism, to me was always like terminally interesting and fascinating on like an aesthetic or even intellectual level. But the reality that we've taken from that, like the way that it's manifested now that, you know, the metaverse is upon us, I guess. I don't know how people are going to treat that. I mean, maybe that'll be like the MySpace moment of Facebook. Who knows? It's like, you have to realize like how terminally alienating that is. But at the same time, I think people make too much out of like to me, the unconscious mind can't separate what is like a facticity from the real. You know what I mean? Like there was this one, do you remember when cringe videos, were you into cringe videos back in the day, like 2013?
Like political cringe or like
I mean,
general?
yeah, they became like in general.
Yeah. No, I that was definitely a thing that I enjoyed.
Yeah, me too. Like I remember when that one YouTuber, Mr. Amazing, did cringe comps, but then he like took them down. He was like embarrassed of them. Then he decided to become a Bernie bro or something. Anyways, doing like Jacob Geller type content. But shit. But what about the presence of time? So there was this one video I distinctly remember. It was this woman, and she was wearing these like acid wash jeans, but like she wasn't like terribly unattractive. Like she was kind of plain Jane, but you could tell she had like autism, like female autism. And she was talking about how she married someone in Second Life, but the guy like cheated on her with her best friend in Second Life. But like they don't know each other in real life. They've never met. They don't even like, it took them like years to like even face each other, like share photos or whatever. And I'm thinking like people in the context back in the day of like when the cringe comp reigned supreme, people were like, oh my God, this is terrible, touch grass, blah, 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 right? But yeah. I remember thinking like after a while, I was watching it with my best friend at the time, and I said like, you know, it's funny how to her though, it is real. It's more real than like anything else because, you know, maybe because of various neurological disorders, but it's real in the sense that if you invest enough time with someone, even an avatar with someone on like a constant or pretty consistent basis, I think like you get to a certain level where you know this person, even if you know that is, it's not the facticity of it. It's rather like an image or like a curated presentation of who this person is. You know what I mean? Like,
well, I don't think that even applies just to like her. I think that applies to
everyone,
to like Twitter or anyone with an online
Yeah.
presence, right? Like we try our very best to give the most curated position of what we think
Right.
is ourselves, right? Like, well, our true self or whatever, even though most of the time it isn't. Like, and that's the problem, because if you wanted to be your true self, then you're going to really lean in on the parasocial relationship and start venting your insecurity and start doing all the things that
Oh,
you're
I've
not
been
supposed
there.
to. But you're not technically supposed to do that, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's all
When
these
you
no-nos that are self-destructive,
Exactly. When
which
you
is why you
show
have to curate it.
vulnerability. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like when you show vulnerability, I do notice that if certain people are alerted to it, that's when the knives come out. Like, okay, the recent simp thing, that was like, semi-humorous, even though it had real sentiment behind it. Cause like there's some female mutuals I had that I've talked for a long time, and that I've faced or whatever. But like, that's different. I've had some tweets where in the quest to like keep it real, um, it becomes like, it can become like a source of ridicule. Like those are the tweets that your enemies will sort of find the most. And what I fucking hate is that every time I've ever gotten like ratioed or ever worried about my account was when fucking Twitter didn't like bring up the likes. Like they didn't show me the quote tweets and the likes. I had to like go to the tweet and find it like on my own. Cause I guess Twitter, the way the algorithm works is if you don't interact with a body of people for a long enough time, then I guess like it curates those notifications out of your box, right? So it's like really like every time I've been like hardcore gone after, like the last time was because of a certain thinker of ironies sending his new irony left people after me over a joke tweet. I didn't get those replies. I had to like look for them like a few days later, and it's like scary because it's like, oh fuck, did I lock my account in time? And it's very interesting how things work when you try to express like a modicum of like your real self, but not all the times. Like I've had some good experiences obviously, but I think that it comes from a much older era of the internet where it wasn't taken seriously. It was like a lot of like neurodivergent tech bros of a particular class that was engaging in this new frontier that had sort of rules around and orthodoxies around anonymity and the way that you posted and the limitations that the early internet provided you. Like the early internet, I think, is still spiritually in some ways with us, but they're it's getting to be where, but then you have the opposite, which is like people that are like grifters and influencers that they try to sell you on the idea of themselves, which is obviously bullshit. But like, there's that other extreme,
Well,
so
I
it's
wonder
always,
how much of that. I mean, like, there's the grift portion, right? But those who
yeah,
actually engage in that kind of activity, I think that relates back to our sense of consciousness, where we try to project it onto a digital space, and we actually
yeah,
try to be authentic because it's a lot better than dealing with sort of the real world around you, right?
yes,
And it adds back into what we kind of said at the beginning, where like we make fun of the Jordan Peterson thing about cleaning your room, but like if you are willing to relinquish and surrender any facet of life that you have a modicum of control over in this sort of like microcosm of actual personal agency, right?
yeah.
What else are you to do than to escape this sort of psychological pain, oftentimes self-inflicted, right?
Oh, very
Or
much so.
or where you'll acknowledge problems that you have and you'll go to get help, and then you'll get two answers, right? You'll get the answer where it's like, listen, like this is where you need to like really like fix your shit. But what,
Yeah,
what will most likely happen, right, is that, and you kind of see this on like a male female divide, is like men are told like, well, like delete her number, block it, go to the gym, and like change your lifestyle, right?
yeah,
Whereas women, it's just like, well, here are some SSRIs. Where like
yeah.
even in the United States, it's like, you hear 1 in 10 women are on antidepressants. And then like where you really see sort of the awful culture come out is where it's like white women over 45 make up 41% of that.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and so you dull the pain. You don't do anything to fix it. And so what do you do with that pain? You project it online, and you project it through the popular culture. Whereas you'll see all those god awful memes about like 1950s like commercials or advertisements, or even a freaking Rockwell painting, and it's just like, oh well, he's secretly
he
gay.
was
He
gay.
abuses
He
his
was on,
wife,
yeah, he was
and
on meth. He was
he
on
was
meth, and
yeah. And the daughter can't go to school, and the son's gonna die in Vietnam or whatever, and like that's what it is.
The daughter
and
had
it's
a
like you are
back alley
projecting
abortion.
this terrible, terrible image of your own world, and you're putting out this ugliness because you want to escape from it.
It's literally Pleasantville again. I mentioned this.
Yeah.
It's like literally just Pleasantville. Like that was I shouldn't even say this word on this stream, but I remember this one guy, I think his name was Lemur on Twitter. He said that it was the most vicious no, I'm not gonna say the word, something attack on white America there ever was by Hollywood, by the certain Jesuits that run Hollywood. But no, it's funny, like I think that having gone through that myself, like having been very open about my problems, I guess that's what to go back to the main topic, I guess, of our stream. Did you finish? Okay, did you describe also like your when you actually did get your kidney, how you said it was like day and night, I recall?
Well, so it was a lengthy process, right? Like I stayed in the hospital from like being admitted to being discharged. I was there for like a week, like 5-6 days. And when of course like you're entirely scarred up, like movement is a bitch and all those things.
Oh,
and
yeah.
You've got one leg that is massively bigger than the other, not to mention all the water weight. Is your kidney works into overdrive to like get back to normal.
So you had like phlebitis or some other.
Well, it took me weeks to piss it all out.
Oh, damn.
And when the first month, right, your kidney is like working in overdrive to do it. So you're peeing like on the hour, every hour. I went from being like a 25-year-old to an 85-year-old overnight.
Get the piss jugs around.
Well, and they tell you to measure it, so you have to measure it every time and write it down. So getting up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom.
That's like some Wojak pee pee poo poo mean, right?
They're very, very, very real. I could relate to a variety of Wojaks during that time frame, but after the month, it normalizes out.
Yeah.
You still like go to the bathroom all the time because there's only one kidney, right? But it is night and day from a physical sense, but from a psychological one, it's sort of like to make a certain reference to like a Disney Pixar film. It's at the end of Finding Nemo where they finally escape the dentist office and they're all in their little baggies and they're like, okay, now what, right? And and that's kind of where I'm at now. It's like, okay, now what? And I'm slowly paying off medical bills and things like that and student loans, and I'm thankful that my family is taking care of me, but it's just like, okay, now what? Like I'm trying to put together this plan. I'm trying to put together a sense of what I want to do with my life, because it's like you have a life now, so to speak.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't.
Oh yeah, we're in the same boat, I guess.
Oh, and I'll explain here, because I don't think that this is me being too like personal posting or vulnerability.
We're both neat aristocrats. Oh, maybe not you, but
well, I have a wagey, like slave wage job that I go to, right? Like I go to an office, right? I have my wage cage, but the thing about it is that like since the transplant, it's been church, work, the clinic, and going back home and seeing family. And they make a big deal about certain medical procedures, and they make a certain big deal about, socially, taking it away because you're on immunosuppressants. So it's like, I haven't, and I moved right before all of this started, right? So like I moved from a big like city like El Paso to middle of nowhere, sort of like North Texas kind of deal. And, the familial roots of my waspy family. And I didn't have a time to make friends because as soon as I moved, right, it was, Christmas Day of 2019. And then all this COVID crap happened. And all of a sudden, bam, like no friends, your social life is gone. And then when you're there, even now, right, I'm totally in a position where it's like, oh, like this is my life now. I haven't gone out. I haven't done anything for the, like, I'm actually going to get coffee with somebody, like a woman for the first time since all this has happened. And it's just like, I even told her in this sort of like weird admonishment of myself being like, ooh, this is cringe. Where I was like, hey, can we like not dine indoors? I was just like, for some reason, my inner uneasiness about it, despite the fact I've been in a restaurant before already.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, let's just go outside, we'll do something. I'll cook dinner and I'll bring it to us and we'll have a good time outside in the park. And she's like, yeah, it sounds lovely. And that's what I'm doing this Saturday evening. And it was just like, like this is your step towards a new normal, right? And it's a very real normal for me. And in my consciousness, I'm just like, well, I know people that have gotten transplants that live a relatively normal life. Like, how do they adjust? But nobody that I talk to about it, right, is my age. I couldn't begin to tell you the awkwardness of the fact that I'm in this like hemodialysis center and I'm being treated by nurses who are the same age as me.
Oh,
And,
man.
you know, and they're like, yeah, like, oh, I'm like 24 and I'm like doing X, Y, and Z. And I was just like, oh, well, I'm here, you know, like, and the funniest thing is that the only person that kind of like made it better was this like 50-something-year-old nurse from New York. She had the thickest Boston accent I could imagine, but she was very flirty, very upbeat. And that was kind of the thing that kept it going.
Yeah.
And, but it sticks with you, this sort of mentality where, you know, like, oh, you can enjoy foods that you were told not to eat during this time frame, and in doing so, like, you're enjoying like sweets again, you're enjoying chocolate again, and other kinds of foods. And they're like, yeah, you can pretty much more with some other dietary restrictions to your medication, you can kind of eat what you want. And like in doing so, it's just like I've gained a little bit of weight and I'm not happy with it. And the medication kind of causes your face to round out. They call it moon face. And it's just like, oh,
Moon
well,
face.
they do. And I'm like, that's fucking weird. But like, I guess that's
Oh
normal.
no, you got rid of the Chad jaw. That's
Oh, I know. And
no more jaw maxing.
I know. Well, we'll see about that. I still go to the gym. I still work on cardio. We'll be fine. But the other thing, right, is it's like, oh, also like your hair thinning is a thing, or hair loss is a potential side effect.
Shit. Yeah.
And I'm like, well, that hasn't happened yet. Although there's this like very noticeable Tulsi Gabbard streak in the top of my hair that I've been taking notice of, and I'm like, oh boy, this is fun. But I finally get to look my age, which is nice.
What do you think that the nurse was in like an odd way, like a maternal presence in that time? Do you think like that's?
I think so, because like she had 3 sons. One of them is like really autistic and she was like, yeah, and he's got like a history PhD. And I was like, oh, I have my bachelor's in that, you know, like, but yeah, it was sort of this nice back and forth kind of deal. But it was maybe maternal, although if it was maternal, it was bordering on the mommy GF thing that I can't fucking stand.
Yeah, I was gonna ask.
I hate that with a passion. Like I hate that meme, because it's this sort of like almost in a very Freudian sense, as like, okay, there's clearly some problems here, but by acknowledging that there are problems, right, you're kind of playing into sort of that like leftist, we have to pathologize everything because we have to find out what's wrong with you.
I think like having discussed and like has researched and having to like write something on it, I think like it's not Freudian in the sense of there is like a sort of there definitely is an Oedipalization there, but it's not in the way people think. It's not like directly an Oedipalization of your own personal mother or maternal figure. It's more of like the need for care and comfort, particularly in the younger male psyche that has yet to be integrated into a more like older, like when you get to a certain form of masculinity in your older age, I think like it's very tempting to have sort of a feminine presence that embodies a variety of different things, from the nurturing aspect to sexuality to usually like older women. They're probably like more sexually forgiving of your various like hangups or whatnot. And it's like almost like a weird like Peter Panism of your own like sexual endeavor. It's really weird. But I think that it's not like to me textbook Freudianism. I think like there's much more of an archetypal force going on there, especially when you're in a position of vulnerability, which usually they say that like people with chronic illnesses, you do start to develop a certain like latent sexuality or sexual pull towards your caregivers. It's really weird because you're in that position of being vulnerable, but at the same time, it's like they're the only people that you're interacting with that can sort of give you a sense of you being an embodied person with certain needs and desires, but those desires gets sort of like mediated in a very, in some sense, like maladaptive way. I think that's why like the like mommy GF is like the eternal like millennial pathology of, you know, young millennial men, because in the one end, and again, like, you know, default friend, I had this very long podcast with her, and it's hopefully going to come out soon. We talk about this, and it's like, in one sense, the older woman has like a boy toy, but there is still like the hindrance of that like masculine figure, because now it's like you're almost like an adolescent forever, but only with like this added layer of sexual exploration involved. So it's like on the one end you're like babied forever, on the other end she can't develop because of course like it's this like point of like almost I would say female narcissism to like have a younger dude, right? Like it's so I think like the mommy GF, as tempting as it is, I think like there's a variety of problems there, you know, especially if you do eventually want to have like a wife and kids and everything, because the dynamic is like totally different than like, you know, than like a woman your age where you're building a life together. So
Well, yeah, and I don't know. The interactions, of course, I think were more ironic or in jest, but
yeah, no,
no, but
no,
like
I mean you
even
directly. I'm just
oh
saying
yeah,
where.
no. What I'm trying to get at is just like you can kind of see it though with not just even with people with like chronic illnesses. You can kind of see this with people that feel stuck, especially with people that
Yeah.
are in a very sort of like immediate environment materialist mindset. But I think it's far more urban than it is rural.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Especially because I've lived in cities where you can have almost access to anything in like, you know, in 5 minutes on a drive or an Uber or whatever, versus where I live now. It's like, oh, well, town is like 25 minutes away. And if the highway's shit, then it's like 35, you know, like that kind of
Yeah.
calculation comes into mind. But like I talked about this on a Substack, and I know that you had read it, and I'll let the chat know where
Yeah.
I'm sort of like I tell a very sordid, ribald regret where it's like my body count is like 27, and people are like, "Well, you're not proud of that?" And it's just like, well, no, I'm not, because it's just like what you have done is that you, like with anything, you devalue things, and in that sort of devaluation, like, well, you kind of already know what's going to happen, even if there is that sort of rush of a first time, and you look back on it, or at least I do, and I look back on
Yeah.
it, and it's just like, you know, in this sort of pursuit of things, or this abandonment of these sort of ideas or morals or standards that you set up for yourself, you inevitably regret it, because it's like, oh wow, there are all these opportunities when you sit back and look down on it, where it's like, oh wow, you screwed up here, you messed up here,
Yeah.
you definitely broke X person's like feelings, or you like took advantage of it. And it's just like that's the other half, right, of that sort of perpetual millennial adolescence, where it is about the idea of, oh well, you know, I grew up with sort of like, in the UK they call it like new laddism, or you know, for people
Yeah.
maybe our age, right, it's like, oh, I grew up seeing like American Pie when I was like a teenager, and like that was sort of the goal, where it was now a far more like less rapey Revenge of the Nerds, where you know, you have the kid going out to be with like Stifler's mom, and sort of like that embodiment of,
Yeah.
well, just enjoy what you can, and like get on with it, because that's what it means to be X, Y, and Z, especially when it comes to masculinity and sort of this millennial, you know, post, you know, 1999 mindset. And I think that also comes with its own burden of pain and our own burden of how we view the self, because you can look back on everything and you can acknowledge, whether you're with an older woman or whether you're with somebody younger, like you kind of have to ask yourself in the question, and I think people do ask themselves this question, is, well, what am I doing? You know, like, why are we
Yeah.
here? What am I doing here? I'm
Yeah.
laying in bed in somebody's apartment or in my apartment, just, you know, you devalue the meaning of what this intimate act is
Right.
supposed to be. And as someone who grew up in a very Baptist household and had his own, like, you know, like you have that traditional waspy like shame about it in the same way like certain Irish Catholics do, and then you would like lose it as you sort of engage in that agnostic, atheistic teenager phase.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there are some people out there that never experience that, and thank God for them. But for the rest of us, right, as you come back to religion, especially in my instance, it's just like, okay, I have gotten close to meeting my creator. I know what death looks like, at least in my perspective. Um, you know, maybe we should take stock in the things that maybe that meaningless hedonism of sort of the mentality to do something about it. And that's when I started going to church, and
Mm.
it's sort of like the church shopping. I hate saying that phrase, but it's kind of what I did. But I finally went
Church
in.
shopping.
I finally went in on a Sunday, and I went into Divine Liturgy at the small Orthodox church not too far from me, and I was moved by Divine Liturgy, and moved by the process of the anaphora and
Mm.
standing. And I said, okay, we're gonna stay here. You know, we're gonna come back. And I have been ever since. I still don't know too much about doctrine. I still don't know too much about the you know, the origins and the theology of it. But I know
Yeah.
that I'm still, like I said, I'm still learning. But it's just, to me, this is a way to understand it, and this is a way that my consciousness and my ability to reflect and understand can find some aspects of understanding and process it. And this, I think, is where at the very beginning of the stream, when we were talking about the whole theosis thing, about if I am to get closer, then I am to try and make sense from my own suffering and try to make sense from my own understanding of the world and what I've gone through. That way I can be closer, so to speak. And and what I appreciate about it is that, you know, I've been through a lot, I've seen a lot, I've lived all over Western Europe, and I've lived all over the United States, coast to coast. Now,
no shit,
dead set. Yeah, I've lived all over the place. And the thing about it is, it's just like, that's where I kind of joke I can relate to the mold buggy and, you know, joke about being a rootless cosmopolitan, because I am in some sense. But I moved back to the family roots, and there's this pond on the property, and it's just like, this makes sense. I am anchored and now once again tethered to the world. And, you know, I have this capacity to do so. But there's a gentleman in the chat, Bane Clandestine, who says you overestimate today's normies' ability to reflect. And I recognize that that's very true, because you've got the Aristotelian idea of like the slave mentality, which I think perfectly translates to the NPC meme. There are people that can't do it, and we already have all those studies that tell us that there are certain people that can't visualize an apple in their hand, or to a certain degree of texture, or rotating it in their hand. And to me, that's crazy, because, you know, I've got the inner monologue. I will mentally go back and forth over things. I can visualize the apple.
Yeah.
And like you said, that bifurcation of society and reality. How do you live with somebody who doesn't have, you know, sort of, to make in computer terms, who doesn't have enough RAM to like make that work?
It depends. I think, like, when you're in a certain mode of consciousness, I mean, like me, I mean, I'm terribly ashamed to admit I haven't had a lot of this year in particular. I mean, everything's just fucked up, so I haven't been going out like a lot in terms of plein air work. But when you are even just in front of a still life, or when you're doing stuff on location, it's like memory. A lot of artistic exaggeration comes from memory, because when it comes to like the measurement of certain elements within a landscape, you have to sort of, you don't have a lot of time to like fidget and like measure things out perfectly. You really have to just go with your gut and like look at something and like not waste a whole bunch of time. So I mean, of course it's easier when you know like a lot of rudimentary rules. Like I'm starting to get a bit more into like anatomy and stuff. But when you have a limited amount of time to capture the light of a certain scene, you have to really like go by memory. Like you have to, like, the rotating apple has to become what you're doing on a regular basis. Only instead of a rotating apple, it's a human face, or it's the way the light hits a certain house or a certain tree. Like, it, you know what I mean? Like, a lot of people, the fact that they can't do that is kind of fucking crazy, actually. Like, that's, you know what I mean? Like, damn, like that's, it's almost like it cuts you off from, I think, certain capacities within the human experience. Yeah.
No, I think that does make a lot of sense, especially when we think about how do people sort of transition from that state of mind to maybe how you and I think, or know the rules, or know how do you get to that position? Because I think to some state, you know, we there's always that discourse about, well, can you wake these people up, or can people be woken up? And I think for a vast majority of people, you kind of can't. I think that the last, 18 months are proof of that.
Yeah.
But, there's a gentleman in the chat that says you can't convert the normies, but you can black pill them. And
you can
do that. You can black pill the shit out of them. I think that's wholeheartedly true. But once you do that, right, you come back to the thing that we were talking about earlier, is that once you get to that black pill, you have two choices, which is you either double down, reject it, say screw you, and find an escape. Or you sort of take stock of it and recognize, okay, what do I do, right?
Because you become a fail son. Yeah.
And that's the funny thing about, because that's pain, right? Like when there's that almost epiphany or realization, or the movement of some kind of spiritual reality that hits you, where it's like, oh man, things are a lot worse than we realized, like that, even if it's done in a joking, ironic veil of self-defense. But you have to like go to bed at night, right? And some people, like most people, can't be converted, but I think most people who can take that and maybe make something of it, those are the kind of people that turn off their phone at night when they go to bed to charge it, and they stare at that black screen and they see the faint outline of their reflection and maybe realize that something's wrong. But that's a very slim number of people. And I think that those are the people that go on a spiritual journey, and that's where you see like the zealotry of the converted. And I mean, that happens regardless of political affiliation or even religious
They go to a
affiliation.
retreat with Jack Cornfield or Thich Nhat Hanh or something. They go, or if you're in English, if you're in England, you'll the women will go to India and get dicked down by a shaman and come home with that particular pants pattern. I think like the problem with a lot of disc, and I've noticed this like by listening to I guess for lack of a better term, the conspiracy movement for like literally since I was like a kid, like listening. I've listened to Alex Jones, I think, for like I want to say 13 to 14 years now. I think like the problem with a lot of like post like libertarian Ron Paul and also like conspiracy movement stuff is that you're equally subjecting your own predication of what is worthy of a population the way that leftoids kind of do, but yet they have the ability to manufacture consent within institutions. What I mean is that the way you look at quote unquote waking people up, waking the sheeple up by like, I don't know, posting enough like D's illustrations edits. Like I think RIP by the way, DVDs, he was one of my favorites. But I think the problem is you've turned that into like a reified commodity by saying like this quantitative number. It's like if we just inject the quantitative number of people with this like pill that can like, you know, the red pills, if we just like inject them through the eyeballs with red pills, then we can like wake them up, quote unquote. Like how that of course, like how that translates into like meaningful social and political change is obviously like a murky area. It's something that, you know, people can't seem to come up with, but also just that you're treating it like the way that like acid heads, the way that like neo hippies treat like psychedelics, like it's this pipeline commodity that you can take and like, you know, drop out, tune in and drop out. And then it's like their bam enlightenment, you know, it's like, that's unfortunately, I think that's the problem with a lot of discourse. Like, it's almost as if I know he was getting ratioed by like some of the worst schools ever. And I have like my doubts of the Rufo thing, although I think James Lindsay is obviously worse. But Rufo, when he had the tweet the other day about, yes, we have to destroy these institutions, we have to go full Leninist, destroy the PTA, get rid of all public school. That to me, I think, is more of a productive sort of like shock doctrine than saying like if we wake enough people up to the, you know, reality that kids are getting indoctrinated by these harpies, it's like blah blah blah. Like that's, if in a way, like the fact that we live in such a condition where extremes are not just normalized, but they're, you know, sold to you from your computer screen, and they almost don't have the material reality of those extremes almost don't exist for most people. So therefore we can entertain a huge swath of like change and destruction in these present conditions we're in. It's almost as if destruction in itself becomes that sort of socio-political, ontological, or an aesthetic like necessity if you're like a dissident who doesn't have a lot of material power or ability to control institutions that informs people's view of reality. By destroying things, by fucking shit up, by going to like the fucking Ken Klippenstein and Chris Hayes of the world when they tweet out, see, look, they want to destroy institutions. It's like, yes, Giga Chad, yes. Because I think that I don't mean this like, I mean this in a systematic way. I don't obviously mean like some like edgy, like anarcho-libertarian, like, you know, I think like destruction comes in a variety of like subtle forms. I think if like Republicans were to get their shit together and like do things like terribly oppress the education system, but then they're like, oh my God, you're defunding kids from learning. It's like, are they learning? Like, really? Come on.
No.
Like, fuck, you know.
There's a great video, Gio, that I really think that you should watch if you haven't already. It's by a guy named Ryan Turnipseed. On his channel, he had a long video about the Zoomers, and he just listed out some of the most depraved, awful shit that he saw in his high school. And some of it,
video, remember
all of that saga. Yeah. He talks about it in great detail, and I think everyone should go watch it after this stream is done, or watch anyone else who's on streaming right now. But like, go watch it, because I can relate to some of it, but then he just jumps the shark, and I'm like, I cannot relate to virtually anything of the things that he said. And I went to a public high school in El Paso, for God's sakes. You know, I saw the worst of the worst. But I think that you're right, though, is that I think if, you know, you can't. I think what we're seeing is that that's a more productive conversation about destruction and rebuilding something with actual nomos. That needs to happen. Because what we're witnessing instead is literally a repeat of the same shit we saw 10 years ago about cringe compilations and making fun of Tumblristas, like on 4chan, where you have I love
if you know what I mean.
Oh yeah,
Tumblristas.
but I love this account. Don't get me wrong, because it's a great way to source just the decline. But the libs of TikTok on Twitter, I love the account, but are we not repeating history?
That's a woman, by
from
the way.
Oh, is it? I'll be damned.
Yeah.
I did not know that. But are we not repeating history from like 10 years ago, where we're making fun of Tumblr and we're making fun of like their weird wolfkin ways, when virtually
meanwhile they make public policy.
Those people dictate public fucking policy. Yeah. Those people dictate the language. Their brand, like,
again,
new
another
words.
W for our default friend Catherine. Another W.
Oh yeah, she's right.
She's right. But I think like this came up recently on stream, actually. You know, it's funny you mentioned how like you talked to Sargon. It's funny because like we had Count Dankula on recently.
Yeah, I saw. I watched a little bit of it.
And it's like, it's funny because it's like, yeah, someone who is big and someone who everyone knows. But when you're like actually in a stream with someone, unless it's someone like you absolutely worship from day one, I've never had like, experiencing bigger guests. It's always weird how you're talking to them normally like anyone else, but you realize that the ceiling from which they're coming from is vastly, almost in some cases, vastly higher than your ceiling.
Oh yeah, it's like going from a pod to like the Cologne Cathedral.
Yeah, exactly. It's like going from the provinces to the Colosseum to the quote gladiator. But so when you talk about like a lot of these accounts like Libs of TikTok or even iHypocrite, like, or like who's that guy that, but he's like much older. He's like of the older like alt-right guard. Like, you know, black people assaulting whites. What was that guy? The Irish guy. Colin Flaherty. Like, yeah, like you have I think
he's still on Twitter.
Yeah, I know. I think like he has like a millionth different like YouTube accounts because they keep nuking it. But I think like the problem is that as much as these people are doing good work, obviously in terms of the archival nature of our state, of like, for the first time in, I would say, human history, although some people contend that we had ancient civilizations that had something similar to the internet, you know, Giorgiani, because we have this ability, let's say for argument's sake, it is like, for the first time ever, we could like categorize and archive like the Kali Yuga in its like most visceral, disgusting sense, to the point where it becomes banality. But at the same time, I think the problem is like, it becomes this weird form of like like doomsday optimism, pessimism, pornography. Like it becomes very pornographic in terms of the black pills that they're delivering. And as much as it's funny to like look at like Libs of TikTok that are archiving these clips of like this teacher talking about pronouns or talking about like, you know, I ain't gonna protect these kids because I'm gonna teach them about CRT. It's like at the end of the day, they're still like, okay, some of them have been fired. Actually, that's pretty good. I 100% agree. But I think the problem is that you have to realize that these people, they're still in positions of nominal power, or at least nominal consent by the regime. So it's like, as much as it's good when one of these ghouls gets fired, the vast majority of them, I feel like it'll go back to business as usual. Like, yeah, people will probably like harass them on the internet, which I mean, they're like already living in a form of psychic hell to begin with, even though they don't realize it. But at the end of the day, I think the problem is like, when you view these things through entertainment, it's just like those cringe compilations. It's just like, you know, wrecked feminist videos or whatever.
Well, and it's also just like what we saw recently with that Ali or Allison Walker person talking about, you know, maps.
God.
To which I responded with this. This is Mr. Chippy. He's an anti-map activist. And he is our best friend.
The best response to that one was this guy had a picture of a hunter, but he's like in a plaid shirt, and he's got like the double barrel, which I actually have one of those double barrels. It's like a Russian, like Soviet Union made. My old man had it back in the day. Like it's pointing, but it's like got the winking like peppy face, and it's like, and the guy's like, "It's time for you to go," and it's like. Boom! Like,
all the memes where it's like, oh, that's very nice. Now please face the wall. I think that that's what's needed, because
yeah,
everyone from like James Lindsay, who's cringe as can be, to even like Curtis Yarvin are like, listen, like there is a very low energy, low thumos kind of population that exists
yeah,
in the West. And there are some pockets of where it does exist, and it's very little, say like France, Italy, or protests in Australia.
yeah,
But
yeah.
like outside of that, it's virtually non-existent. And I think that you have to find a way to take the performative low energy, oh, go to the ballot box, go to the rally. You need to change the language. And it's just like,
Yeah.
listen, you need Mr. Chippy, you need to face the wall, you need to seize the endowments. I think Aaron McIntyre has the best tweet about it. We're like, this ends with tanks on Harvard campus. And I don't care how Fed posty that sounds. That kind of energy is necessary.
Yeah. The problem is, I feel like, without naming names, although if you followed me for a long time, you know, like I have just a totally irrational hatred of like certain bigger e-celebs. Like very few, but like there's a couple of them, maybe like a handful. I think the problem is like when you, I don't like, I want to transition out of this after. I want to talk about maybe a bit of my experience, but
go for it, please.
When I think like the problem is that when you're like, okay, well, here's the plan. We have to basically have more based GOP, and like we have to elect Trump again or whatever. Like we have to elect a reincarnation of Trump, like an avatar, right? Like I think that can only like really get you so far in terms of political action. Like even just like the ways in which you can quote unquote red pill certain people, like boomers, right? Like boomer conservatives. Like I think that by going out, like there's only some things that like rallies and political action packs or whatever can get you, because unfortunately, like as blackpilling as it is, I think like NRX, they were correct. Like Molbug was correct in that, and again, he was taking this from DeJuvenile, that like every sort of mass social movement or political movement, any sort of like groundswell of political support for something, that has like a tacit consent by these sort of elite structures at the time. And that's a reality I think we're still living in. That's not like the whole like liberal boomer psyop of like the 60s social movements. That's all just kayfabe. We know that. I mean, that's a basic bitch point. But the way that, for example, you have like fucking ghouls again, like Chris Hayes talking about, you know, this is all funded. You know, Chris Rufo's funded. Like, that's basically what they're doing. They're just like, when you do it, it's evil. When we do it, it's evil. When they do it, it's just politics as usual. I mean, that's such a common game, but the level of like people that are engaged in that mindset, it's kind of like a moment's reflection could say, yeah, I mean, maybe it's a shitty move that, like, I don't know, the fucking Koch brothers or whoever are like, not to say that they are like, what's the meme example? But let's say like Peter Thiel is giving Chris Rufo money. Like it's like, it's like, yeah, okay, who cares? He gets money. Like the point being is that if you're using that tactic, it's like, that's how politics works, baby. Like that's the reality of it. That's not going to change.
I mean, it's the Pareto distribution, right? 20%
exactly,
of the population is going to fund 80% of the movements, you know.
Exactly. And the problem is that the right wing, there was this great, like, I'll leave it with this because then I want to move on. There was this fucking tweet by this like lawyer that of a certain I want to say Middle Eastern or Indian Brahmin racial mixture, where it was about the New York Times, how they were covering the Rittenhouse trial, and it was just like a neutral, like it was actually the paragraph was to denigrate Rittenhouse, but of course when you take a single paragraph, right, and comparing it to the Michael Brown coverage of the New York Times at the time, and you had a bunch of these blue checks, you had like fucking Soledad O'Brien and like Brian Stelter and like that fucking terrible, what's the guy's name, Rex Coleman, whatever, it's fucking terrible, you know. But you realize that that's part of their game, like that's their tactic, because they can so effectively organize their discourse around certain material ends. Then they will push and say that the New York Times is being insufficiently leftist, and it works for them. Whereas for us to say that the National Review, you know, should chop the head off, I mean, in Minecraft, chop the head, like in terms of editorialship of people like David French, right, in National Review, and we like point out, we ratio him all the fucking time, and we say that David French is terrible, which he is. He's a ghoul. He's a bad faith actor. But that never works in our direction because there's no sort of structure to support the more fringe elements of the conservative or right-wing movements in America or Canada or wherever, to say that these publications are basically a boot to our throats. Whereas the New York Times, it works because of all of those sort of networks and activist groups and NGOs, and even just like blue ticks themselves, the way that they organize. It works to push the New York Times in a more leftist direction, even though but to me, it's all kayfabe, because that like tweet that blew up on Twitter, that was probably pushed by people within Twitter. That was probably not a fake, but that was like a cherry-picked quote from the New York Times. It was basically making a mountain out of nothing, not even a molehill, in order to push and cement a certain form of discourse from prevailing within the editorial board. Like, who is that guy that people call him a Yahtzee, even though he's part of the tribe? The Cotton guy, what's his name? The senator.
You mean Tom Cotton?
Tom Cotton. When he did that editorial last year during the Kenosha...
Oh, about bringing out the troops, yeah.
Yeah, the New York Times editor, the head editor, got fired for that. Like a sitting senator that publishes an op-ed, like something that would be the most rudimentary thing in any other previous political administration. Like, because politicians, they read editorials whenever they feel like it all the time, right? It's like, to fire an editor over publishing a sitting senator's editorial piece about, the police can't do anything against these mostly peaceful demonstrations. It's like, that's insanity. That's like the level of insanity. That's like the egregore of the derangement the Orange Man derangement syndrome. But it's even beyond that, because really, I believe that Orange Man was just a symptom of where things were going anyways.
But I mean, you're right that it's a symptom, and I'll leave it here so we can transition.
Yeah.
It is a symptom of something that was already long there. I mean, there's a really great Twitter account called the George W. Bush Leftism Bot.
Oh, I love that one.
I love that account because I look at it and I'm like, wow, some of these things seem pretty based now. But like it gives you a sign of just like the utter derangement that existed, and now there's a bot for like Barack Obama, like conservatism bot, and it just sort of it indicates that this derangement has been there for a while, and I think that just comes. And it's a lot more present now, and I'll leave my final thought is that it's a lot more present now because of the technology we have. But I guarantee you that this sort of is also the byproduct of the lived experience being heightened in time preferences, where all forms of politics are basically transcended to a secular eschatology, where it's now or nothing, and we must act now. Therefore, I hate everything. I hate the Antichrist. And those are my thoughts.
No, exactly. And I think the problem is that they were so like placated to during the Obama era, even though when you actually look at, even like, here in Canada was interesting because Stephen Harper was in charge, and he was like, given hindsight now, I know like in the Conservative Party, they're sort of like having like a civil war because Aaron O'Toole is such like a fucking weakling, right? But like Harper was the only, I think, even though, he was a neocon and an Israel firster, blah, blah, blah. I think like in hindsight, he was one of the more stable conservative leaders at the time. But in America, I think the problem is Obama just like totally placated these people, even though he was doing things that an administration previously would have been like viciously mocked and criticized. It's just that he had that aura about him. And I think like Trump, this is old history right now. It seems like 1,000 centuries ago, 2016, which is funny because like I remember back in the day, not to name names, but the certain place I was writing for, a lot of people that are on Twitter still, we would say this stuff. It's like, the right wing needs to actually like unironically read like Lenin and like see how you can dissolve institutions from the inside and then gut them and create a new, right? But I think like the problem with Trump is that moment has passed us in the sense that there wasn't enough good people not inside and outside the administration to truly like create a sort of Leninist vanguard, but only like right wing. And the problem I think is, again, the e-celebs, in my opinion, not to name names, but a lot of people, they discovered a very good grift and they didn't like have a vision of the future when, you know, Trump was out of office. Anyways, I'm just casting shade on people as I always do. I shouldn't really do that.
Oh, I was thinking Steve Turley, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So we were talking about the medicalized subject. I think, like, those who don't know, my own experience is to deal. Of course, it's not as severe as what you went through, obviously, by any means. But I lived for a long time with chronic back and leg pain from sciatica. And a lot of it is to do, of course, with my weight issues, for lack of to minimize it, you know. I think, like, it's really interesting. So what happened was, this happened during the middle of high school. This was years and years ago. A friend of mine, it was in a portable classroom. And I think, like, for some reason, I think he found like a crowbar or something in the closet. And he didn't like wail on me, but like he decided to like trip me as a joke. And so the way I went down, I basically massively herniated my like L5 disc. Is it L5 or like the tail, like the end of the tailbone disc? So
I'm not familiar with the term.
Yeah, it's gotta be, it's some like number, right? So I massively herniated my disc. I couldn't walk for a good minute. I couldn't get up. I was terrified. I was like screaming and swearing my head off, which I felt really bad because, like, you know, so then like when I got around to it, you know, I went home, stayed home, but then the next day is when it started, when like the chronic like pain and uncomfortableness and like burning and cutting, and it's just like it took away like months out of my life, more or less. I had to like, I think because I didn't go to physio for a long time. I still didn't go, like, sort of, I'm self-taught. Well, I'll get into that. So I didn't go to physio because I was stupid. I basically like had to train myself to walk again with my one leg, which like you could actually see one leg was skinnier than the other, which is really weird. And I couldn't like move for more than like, I would be going to class because it was like right in the middle of like the winter break. So I would like go to class, I'd pop a fucking Advil, and I would just like waste away. I couldn't sleep in my own bed. I had to sleep. We had this couch that had the footrest thing that flips up. I just sleep like that with pillows on my side for like a few months. And the thing is, when you go through chronic pain, and I would like, what, before I go further, I will say that there are people who have it like way worse than me, right? Well, even back then when I had an attack, because there's people that have chronic spinal conditions like cauda equina and ankylosing spondylosis and other autoimmune provoked conditions that basically make it impossible to live without a degree of back and leg pain. And so when I had my attacks, and here, you know, knock on wood, thank God I haven't had an attack in almost, I want to say, 3 to 4 years. I think the last time I tweeted about it was like the beginning of 2018. And it's partially due to me taking my health more seriously and me stretching and exercising more and discovering various neuroflossing and physiotherapy stretches and things of that nature that have helped me. But I lived for years with chronic sciatica, to the point where for like years at a time, I would wake up in the morning with chronic pain in and it would take me like a good half hour or so to like basically like inch my way to the washroom in the morning and like get up. And like, I knew that just getting up in the morning would be like a feat, would be like a terror, right? And I can only sleep a certain way and stuff like that. And when you live in that state of chronic pain, as you know, it's almost like, it's not just that your body is like not yours anymore, but you sort of like dip out of ordinary life to the point where it sort of plays on you mentally. But then when you get over the hump, the worst part is that you have an anxiety of having another attack, an anxiety of like, I have to wake up in the morning, I have to do this shit again. And I did discover that later on, it was also because I had a shitty like box ring bed that like I went out and I bought a good like Tempur-Pedic memory foam, blah, blah, blah. So like when you have for years and years, something's wrong with you, I would just basically dip out for like a few weeks to a month when I had an attack, and I would just sit there in pain watching TV because I can't do anything. And I would just basically not move, and I couldn't like actually bend down or do anything like that. Like it was like just a feet just to like walk to the washroom, right? And so there's this one time where I was laying on my side and I literally had lock muscle on my lower back and I couldn't get up. I was laying there for I think a good 2 hours when I just decided to say fuck it, and I violently shook myself up to sit up, and it was like you could hear the fucking China bells ringing, you know what I mean? Like some kind of Bruce Lee movie. But then after I got better, I think, and as time went on, I discovered more stretching techniques and more exercises, and I could get to the point where I can manage it. And I haven't had like a really like there's some days that are worse. There's actually some seasons that are worse than others. Like near the end of the summer, I'm pretty like my leg, I can notice it more. But now I'm like pretty good. Like the winter months, I'm all right. But when you do live with a condition of chronic pain, I think that the anxiety of the pain coming is really what the mind killer is. Like the sort of the anxiety that's, and to this day, like my father, he knows because he's had his own issues. Like he sees like, yeah, you have anxiety condition. I go, no fucking way, you know, no way. Like I'm not, you know, but I noticed that whenever I'm in a state of like work or exercise or any amount of pain, my mind immediately like fires off into like, okay, what if I have another attack? It's like that anxiety is almost worse than like the reality. Because like after a while, you know, like, yeah, maybe I'll wake up in the morning with a little bit of like soreness or whatever. But it's that fear of like waking up in the morning and knowing like, oh shit, it's back. Like the demon is back again. And I have to like plan my life in such a way where I can't move. And it's like every like from the meal I eat to like the time I go to the washroom to like where the fucking remote is on the couch, like every little step is like meticulously planned out, because the thought of like just gutting it and saying like, okay, I'm going to go through this and I'm going to work and I'm not going to let it control me. Like you can say that in your mind, but when you have like an inflammation where your disc is like slipping out and you're like really fucked up on Tylenol 3s and other drugs, and it's like you really don't like think about that in those terms. It's more of like, what is my survival like? What can I do today? And
yeah,
like
the lizard brain turns on.
Exactly. And so and then when you don't wake up in the morning and you're still like that, and you're still like that, and it's months and you're like that, and you don't really like that, just further entrenches the shit that was already happening in my life, which is, you know, not falling out of favor, but like, you know, moving on from certain friends or like not having the normal sort of like milestones in terms of companionship and all of that. You know, I have my friends IRL and all that, but it's more of like the other shit that, you know. So I think like that when you have a condition like that, it really just drives you within yourself, and it's always like that looming sort of like black cloud over you. It's like, you know, and the thing is like my condition is pretty common and not even like particularly as severe as other people who have had like autoimmune disorders that affect the lining of their spine that are brought about by like MS or meningitis or things like that. And that's another thing is like when you have a degree of a medical condition, you start to like become a hypochondriac where you fucking Google like different illnesses to be like, what are my chances of this? Like, it's really weird mindset when you have like a bit of hypochondria. Like, believe it or not, despite me being like a total, like a fat ass, right, that has neglected, and I could get into that a little bit. I've had Twitter threads about neglecting my body and all that crap. But it's like, believe it or not, like I had a bit of like bouts of hypochondria that are in tandem with the worriment over experiencing chronic pain, because it's like, you're like, oh my God, I don't do this, I don't do that, but maybe I have this, maybe I have that. Then it's like every little thing, like I used to do this where it's like every little fucking new like mark or like boil or like wart on my skin, be like, oh my God, is that skin cancer? But my old man's like, you don't go out enough to have fucking skin cancer. Like, when I was really bad, I would hermetize myself. So it's like my old man's like, you don't have enough fucking UV damage like I do, because he works construction, right? He's a construction company. And it's like, you don't go out enough, but it's like still, it's like that that navel gazing obsession over bare life itself becomes front and center, whether it's like any like little symptom you have. It's like, you know what I mean? I think it's hard to describe, but I think you probably know what I'm talking about.
No, I do.
Yeah.
And I was gonna hop in here because
Yeah, go ahead.
there are two ways in which I can really relate to that in reference to what I've gone through. Because when you're at home, right, and you're doing the dialysis, one of the things that is very common with dialysis, whether it's hemo or the peritoneal, is cramping.
Yeah.
And because of how this catheter is now in your abdomen and it goes into this cavity, you have to purposefully sleep on your back.
Oh shit.
And that's a weird thing to get adjusted to, but now that's the only way I sleep. But the worst thing about it is that it would be 3 a.m. in the fucking morning, and you're supposed to get out of bed in like 3 hours when the thing is done, and your legs just cramp up, and you can watch it happen in real time.
Oh yeah, I've had that. Yeah.
And it is the most, like, you can't move, like you can't, like there's like the cord or like the tubes and whatever, like they have some like distance, but you're alone in your room. You have this machine plugged into you. This is the machine that you do daily to live, and you can't fucking move. And you are left to like just cramp and cry out in pain. And you hate going to bed at night because every fucking time it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Even if you lighten your treatment load, it's still going to fucking be there because that's a present part of it. And then even now, the scary thing is, and this is me being a dumbass not thinking about it, but like post-transplant, right? Like, I was finally getting into the office, and I noticed like some really bad pain on my right side where the transplant is, but no fever or anything. I was still going to the bathroom, but it was like really intense pain, and it wasn't over the transplant site. It was on my hip, and I did the usual Google thing, and I was just like, oh, well, this could be a clot. And I was like, well, that's dangerous, so let's go to the ER. And of course, I have no nerve endings with this transplanted organ, so I'm not going to know what this pain is. But I didn't want to risk it, right? And they're like, well, pain on the side of your transplant is going to be common where your scars are and where your hip is, because, there's increased blood flow to this area. As your body adapts to it, like, pain in that area is going to be fine. But in the back of your mind, right, like, even though there's no fever, there's no pain over the transplant site, and you're peeing like a racehorse, you're still going to panic when that pain comes, because it's like, is this where things go wrong? Is this finally where the good times stop rolling? And I finally gotten to the point where I go to the transplant clinic once a month now. And so even now, where I live this relatively normal life, I drown my kidney in water, because that's what the dietitian tells you to do, is to drink a ton of water, more than the average person. They call it showering the baby, which I always think is weird. They call a kidney a baby, and I find that awkward. But neither here nor there. And they tell you to do all that. And even then, like, there's a pain on the scar, or there's a pain on your hip or something. And I'm just thinking to myself, all right, this is it. I had a good 5 months and some change. All right, it's time to go back to normal. And it sticks with you. Even though I'm perfectly healthy, I'm probably healthier now than I have ever been in my entire life due to this birth defect. And you get like you had said, like, you dread over it because your mind is thinking, when is the next time it's going to happen? And is it going to be, the big one, the one that, does you in?
Me even, like, I've had like my worriment over like venous thrombosis, like, even though like I have loop veins, so I like wear the compression socks, and I like got tested and everything, and like my family, we haven't had a lot of stuff like that, but I have like congenital what they call venous insufficiency in my legs, so I have to like be conscious of that. So it's like any little pain I have, it's like, oh fuck, like I go this to my old man, I go, do you notice any discoloration on my leg? He goes, no, you don't have a fucking blood clot, you just have muscle pain because you fucking dug out the garden, like, oh man. But like, I think like that's another thing too, like when I was a few years ago, outside of when I graduated, and it kind of like went downhill a bit. This was like around 2016. My like blood sugar was the highest, and like I have what they call pre-diabetes, because it runs in my family, right? So my blood pressure, I was like on the cusp. I was like on the edge, right? And I'm like, when I was like younger, they wanted to put me on the pill. I'm on it now. It's called metformin, and it has like a variety of other health benefits besides glucose. Like it prevents certain like pancreatic cancers and so forth. It's actually quite a good drug. But I was a fucking stupid kid, and it's like I don't want to take pills. And I had a top researcher actually who was educated at Cambridge who actually published papers on diabetes and the function of the pancreas. And I just didn't listen to him because I was a stupid fucking kid. And then when I was like really feeling bad and I felt like I had no purpose and like discovering like my body was just fundamentally fucked up, it's like then I realized like I had to, I had to change.
There's the
right?
wake up call. Yeah,
exactly. So I got in the pills, started changing up my diet. I mean, it's still a struggle. I mean, the biggest thing I had to give up was soda, or well, we call it pop here. And it's like I still struggle. Like the weight is still there because I'm more conscious of it. Like because for years, I described this in various places on Twitter and outside, where you sort of like escape the machinations of your body by going inside of your mind, even though that sounds like total like plebit F-slur nonsense, right? Like
sure.
It is like a reality where I focus so much on university and so much on my studies that and then later on so much of my art that I sort of like neglected the actual problems and like the sort of things that have been plaguing me like really my whole life, which comes down to my body and it comes down to my weight and it comes down to my sciatica and things like that, which is again another product of my weight. So it's like when I think the human mind is fascinating in that it can come up with a lot of like different mechanisms and copes and sophisticated like runarounds from addressing the actual problem, because to address the problem means like that you're taking something away. I guess like for you it's different because with your condition it's not a direct problem of like conscious choice. Now here's the thing, like I think obesity, it's partially conscious choice and it is partially genetics, and it's partially the fucking chemicals in the food and water, and it's partially your own sort of attitude and mental makeup. But I think with you it might be different because you had a condition that's beyond your control, so it's almost like you're a prisoner to this thing your whole life.
I'm a prisoner now forever. Like I'm on immunosuppressants, blood thinners, blood pressure medication, and it's just like all of this, right, to keep this pediatric kidney okay until it grows into a full-sized adult one. But like I don't know how much of a prison as maybe more of a mental prison, because I'm stopping myself out of maybe this innate fear. Like the other week I got some kind of head cold, and because I'm immunosuppressed, it knocked me on my ass. Like I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to do shit. I didn't want to do anything except like, maybe like drink some water and just like lay down and close my eyes.
Yeah.
And like it wasn't even even now I'm still dealing with some residual effects of it. And even now post-transplant, my I never really had allergies, and now I do. And and I'm just thinking to myself, wow, well maybe we won't go out. Maybe we won't try and make friends. Like I'll go to Vespers on Saturdays instead of liturgy on Sunday because there's less people on Saturday. Like all these mental things.
Yeah, you make those
mind. You build the cage in which you will imprison yourself in. And I'm trying my best to like get over that, but like but people tell me all the time, like walk, don't run. Like, dude, you're only 5 months out. Like, just chill. And I don't know how much I want to just take it slow, because in my mind, I'm like, okay, this thing has a limited lifespan of 10 to 15 years if I'm lucky, maybe 20, right?
Your transplant?
Yeah, they don't last forever.
Oh my God, really?
No, they don't. Yeah, they don't last forever. Like I have it lucky. Mine can last a decade or more. Other people don't have like maybe a few years.
Maybe like they can CRISPR one from your DNA in the future.
Well, I'm hoping I can have enough money to afford that in this schizo posty future we're going into. But more on that on Friday. But yeah, and they're also working on an artificial one that I'm praying.
Yeah,
works.
I wonder if they don't have like. I can understand.
They're working on it.
Yeah, like I know that a liver is pretty like hard to have like a mechanical artificial apparatus because it regulates certain hormones and so many. But like with like kidneys are kind of rudimentary. Like hearts are definitely like rudimentary. They have artificial hearts, but like They don't have. I know they can grow livers now. I wonder if they could grow the kidney in the future, like
I'm
from
sure
your
that they
own.
can. I mean, they recently finally made a breakthrough about, using pig kidneys because they used to go through
Yeah,
rejection over all the
they
time due
grow it
to
in the
sugar
pig. Yeah,
issues. But now that they can use actual pig organs and put them in
yeah.
people, that's a huge step in the
I
right
wonder
direction.
if they let you have the pig, like they butcher the pig after your transplant, so you could bring it home and make the gabagool.
That would be a little morbid,
I know, eh? But like,
but also kind of based.
fucking Armin
Um,
Muse pig. Oh
but
shit.
but yeah, I mean, and again, like how you said, you imprison yourself in your
One of my
mind,
one of
and
my favorite tweets, by the way, came from our good friend Feastbab, where it was an illustration. I actually have that book when I was a little kid, of like the pig city, and like the butcher is there, but it has pork, and he said, "You goddamn murdered him! You goddamn murdered them!"
Well, like I don't know if you saw. I think like Publius Agrippa posted it where they're talking about like French postmodernists and how it like makes someone like lose their mind, so they like redact them in certain and poetic ways, and they
Oh
call
yeah.
it the deconstructionist. I wanted to redo it, and I wanted to like tweet, and I'm going to tweet it out later because this idea is just I think a banger in my mind, where it's like, after reading Fanged Noumena, like this post-grad philosopher is driven insane with schizophrenia and decides to find other French-influenced postmodernists and slowly devour them in cannibalistic means. Cue the title, Body Without Organs. And
I
that would
guarantee you some grad student has probably done either a performance piece or a short film where like Deleuzian cannibalism or something, or like Nick Land acceleration, like digital cannibalization of like
I'm
the digital.
I'm gonna prescribe it too, where someone's losing their mind over Fanged Noumena. I'm just gonna
Oh
tweet, I'm just gonna tweet it at him and see what he thinks.
man,
I'll
I
probably
wish.
get blocked, but it'll be
Oh
worth it.
god, I wish Nick Land could like talk about like that. I guess he wants to like never talk about
The
academic philosophy
CCRU
again.
days.
Yeah, like
I saw a very normie Facebook video about like the weird political philosophy and life of Nick Land. And it's like this like short 17-minute long video from a perfectly normie perspective. And I'm listening to the shit that he did with the CCRU, where he would just be like sitting there listening to like the jungle music, and there would be people in the crowd that would be like, we're still Marxists,
Yeah,
and it's
he
just
he'd coo into
I just died laughing. And I think Cyber Ninja
man.
Zero said it. Yeah, Chad Hack. I think that's the video that I watched.
Yeah,
And I watched it and I just died laughing. I'm like, I want a biopic movie of this man's career starring Michael Fassbender as Nick Land, and just I want to hear it. I just want to know more about it.
He would be a good one,
but we'll never know more. And then disappear, right? And then the epilogue is like China, like 2013, just starting to like rapidly type the Dark Enlightenment. Like I want that movie.
I think like that's why a lot of like GACs, like gender like transhumanist trannies, that I think that's why they follow Nick Land, because they're waiting for the day that he talks about that stuff again instead of like Bitcoin and internet racism. So I think like that's probably like the day that Nick Land doesn't become like a boomer conservative internet racist and like goes back to like smoking meth and listening to jungle music in like the grad lounge of Warwick. It's like,
return
to accelerationist Nick Land. But you were saying about
give me a meltdown in 2021, Nick. That's all I'm asking for. Give me one where you look back on it and tell me how much of it came true.
That's not about
I'm half tempted to do it for him. But no, I think we're nearing the 2.5 hour mark. So I think I know, right? This has been a great talk. I wish we could do this more where it's just riffing on life and not necessarily political observation.
Maybe we can. I wanted to leave you with a passage to make things go like full circle. This is from, I believe, a paper on De Goethe City Journal, being in timeless faith, juxtaposing Heidegger's anxiety and religious experience. So the sort of like Heidegger inspired a lot of like the French existentialists to talk about the sort of condition that existentialists from like Kierkegaard onwards were talking about, which is the condition of human anxiety. So a lot of different writers like Hannah Arendt, Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Jean-Paul Sartre, although I would say that Sartre like bastardized what Heidegger was talking about. Because Sartre,
yes, because he was too busy trying to plow Simone de Beauvoir. But
yeah,
anyways,
yeah. So he was like, and plus, like, he was very adverse to like any Heideggerian metaphysics because like people call it the poetic turn of Heidegger. I think like there's a debate like whether the first half of Heidegger with Being in Time, or like what is called in the second half where you have like poetry, language, thought, what is called thinking, blah blah blah. So this is what Heidegger talks about in terms of anxiety. Anxiety is more of like the modern condition of a society that isn't well integrated with our consciousness towards death, or where Dasein does not integrate within itself the knowledge of being towards death, right? So this is a quote. Let's see here. So anxiety in Heidegger's Being in Time. In Being in Time, Heidegger reveals revelatory power of Stimmung, which is translated mode or attunement, having both the sense of human voice, das Stimm, and the turning of a musical instrument, das Stimming. I guess that's where the autists get the word styming. Dasein does not exist in some neutral objective state to only then have. I mean, basically, Dasein is like in the thrown into the world of relations. There's not like this beginning, terminal, like absolute focal, like absolute Archimedean starting point like there is with Descartes. Like Heidegger, he rejects all of that. He overturns Western philosophy. So it's like it's no longer like I think therefore I am. That's like the primary knowing thing that we have about the self. So Dasein is always in a mood, whether happy, angry, sad. Even the seeming absence of such moods is merely the subtle presence of other ones, such as boredom or tranquility. The ever-present mood hints on the inescapable fundamentally as existential of Dasein. For just as reason cannot claim to have an emotional explanation to accomplish all our moods, so too our own ideas are always accompanied by mood. A bad mood can derail the mind and dull the senses. As such, many decry emotions as distractions from reality, but Heidegger turns this on its head, arguing that reality can only be seen clearly if mood first allows it. So there's a clearing. So to Heidegger, truth is aletheia. It is a clearing. It is a presencing, or it is made present to us. It is no longer this like Kantian like noumenal distinction, right? So submitting the realm of discourse, the authoritative sense of mood. If mood is not on board, theory goes nowhere. In turn, mood reveals the world in ways that theory cannot. Then it goes on to explain. It's actually a good paper. You could find it. It's called, again, for people who want to know, it's by, it's from the journal Open Theology by Jonathan Lionheart, Being in Timeless Faith, Juxtaposing Heideggerian Anxiety and Religious Experience. So what this paper talks about, it talks almost similar to what you were saying about theosis, how to Heidegger, anxiety reveals more than anything. It places an emphasis on that which should be placed emphasis on. It is a tuning mechanism. It is something that delivers you into a knowledge of your state, but also like an emotional embodiment of the state of anxiety that we live in the modern world, in this sort of like crisis of meaning, you could say, or what Heidegger would call a crisis of being. We don't know from the root from which being itself is made present to us. So in a way, for Eastern Orthodoxy, you could say, I mean, I'm pretty sure like some theology theory cell grad has done this, but like
probably
you could say that what you were describing in terms of anxiety and theosis, of exploring that which should be paid attention to, it's almost kind of similar to what Heidegger was getting at. Although Heidegger is much more in tune with, like, ironically enough, a lot of like Eastern traditions. Like some people make this bridge between like Heidegger and Taoism and so forth. But you could say that Heidegger was getting at a similar notion where if you could like describe for people who don't want a little bit of theosis for people who don't know, people who aren't Orthodox, like what is your understanding of theosis, like you were saying?
Well, I got a very like explain like I'm five explanation to me.
Well, I
when
don't expect a Jay Dyer
Oh
video.
well, no, but no.
Yeah.
What I mean though is that the first time I was in the hospital, I had some time alone. Like my parents, my mom went to bed. Like she was at this like home to stop by there.
Yeah.
And I had asked for a chaplain. And lo and behold, it was one of the priests at the church that I now go to because the hospital is relatively close by.
Oh, wow.
And the way that he kind of described it to me in this sort of way of explaining theosis to me was just this idea that it's achievable through synergy of how we act and behave as human beings,
Right.
and what God does or what God has created. And that it is this transformative process to make a union with God or to be with God. It's not like the traditional theology or theologian idea of it being academic and looking back on what the church fathers said or anything like
Right,
that.
right.
Although there's people that do that, right? It is to understand to live, this a holy life, a godly life, a life to be like him. And there's a lot of people in the Eastern Orthodox Church from videos that I've been watching, or people that are of the church that have talked to me about it, because I'm still very, very new. I don't claim to be an authority here, but it's this idea that the trials and tribulations you go through, you are trying to relate them back to the trials of Christ and
Yeah.
to understand what Christ went through for your sins. You are recognizing it's sort of like it's almost like the meme about like, why do you give me your toughest battles? Because you're my like strongest soldier or whatever.
Yeah.
But in a way where like you are meant to live sort of this ascetical, holy life and recognize that your battles are your own, and that if you think things are bad, that you can relate to the fact that things were so much worse for your savior, and he had done it with sort of that understanding that prophecy could not be
Right.
stopped, and this is what he is to do. Which if we're ever to do another stream, I think that we should probably do it like a Ben-Hur stream, now that I just referenced that. But yeah, so as we get close to the end, I think I'll leave here with a verse, just sort of the how you're referencing this like paper on Heidegger.
Well,
I'm just gonna quote scripture.
Yeah, because theosis requires catharsis and
Yeah.
kenosis, which is like the emptying of the self and to be one with the energies. I mean, I'm not Orthodox myself, so the essence and energies things kind of confuses me, but like I have some, but yeah, basically the sort of, I think catharsis in a way is similar to what Heidegger was saying about the role of anxiety within the self. It gives you a clearing of being. It points you to the direction by which being emanates.
Well, and I think, and like I think I had a moment like that of catharsis a while back, where I got a letter from the hospital that said, "Hey, your letter to the donor family is in their mailbox, and they've read it more or less."
Oh, wow.
And I kind of, and that was the only moment since the transplant where I let it out, and that was the only time where I've expressed genuine emotion and sort of this release. And to me, it's just like, yeah, like I don't know if they'll respond. It took me weeks to write something. I mean, for them, it's probably even longer, right? Like they've lost a kid, right? And it's a relatively recent blow. And like I let it out, and I just let my body and my mind and I guess my soul kind of recognize that you have been given this gift, and by I guess providence, right? And I sort of like prosty roots, like by providence, you have been given this new lease on life, and you must do as thy will. And I guess that's where I'm at, right? And I think a lot about this verse from Proverbs 19:21. Many are the plans in a man's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. And to me, that sticks out a lot with me, especially as I just think about, well, I have all these things that I want to do with my life, but I'm told to walk, don't run. So at that point in time, just be one with the Lord and to continue on. And so I do, and I go on Saturdays and I go on Sundays, and I try and make sense of what's going on,
But it's true. There's a time and a place for everything.
Exactly.
Always, like that's how it works. In like the mystery of it is that it will maybe not work everything out in time, but there's a right time, I think, for people to grasp it. It's like Heidegger would say that anxiety tears us away from what he calls the they, which is like the mass individual, the inauthenticity, the bad faith of being. I mean, Sartre, he turned it into this like shitty, like, left Lolbert nonsense about bad faith, but like he, like the they is like that sort of monotony of, and sort of like the pedantic and banal monotony of the everyday existence that we're subject to. It's like going over like the typical like political bullshit, or like something like the sort of the most mundane sort of escapist trappings that pull you away from the sort of like the inner world. Like that's the whole point. Like the things that prevent you from achieving what Heidegger would call authenticity within, like, you know, the being in the world, the Dasein, right? So,
I think that's why I like doing the fishing videos so much, because that is
yeah,
something that I authentically enjoy. I love fishing. I love hunting. I love hiking. Those are
yeah.
great pleasures in life that also, ground you in the natural world. And I think that this is sort of a good way to transition towards the shilling and endorsements parts. So as I wrote down in the description, Gio, the kingly Gio Pennacchietti, writer, artist, and co-host of Break the Rules. Do you have anything that you're working on your own channel? I have your link tree and channel link down below. Because I love the last video of yours that I watched. I think it was like that 45-minute like reacting to this really god awful blue check Twitter thread.
Oh yeah, that
I
one
was there
about
for the premiere, and I
yeah.
loved that to death. But if there's anything that you want to shill to the
I
audience to let
have
people know, go for it.
I have on my YouTube channel, I'm always working art. I have, I think, finally getting back into writing. I have one article for the Passenger Magazine contest. And I have another one that will be on post internet art or like acceleration, I think. But my YouTube channel, Giant Productions at twitter.com, I have on my Odyssey archive channel. I'm doing Odyssey exclusives now that are too spicy. My recent one is about the YouTube dislike, and I just did that for OPSEC reasons because I'm basically bashing YouTube. And another one I have is like this Vice documentary about this woman who like pretending to be a glowy, where she's like infiltrating the dangerous evil incels. I have a reaction video I just recorded, and I'm gonna upload that soon, maybe tomorrow. But I also have an important announcement on the YouTube channel. Is probably, I want to say Friday, depending how quickly I edit this thing. I have an absolute mega podcast coming out on me and my good friend, one of my best friends in the world, Matthew the Stout. We have this podcast called Style Talks, where we talk specifically about the work of art and aesthetics and different things, but it's totally left field. We're doing a music criticism one. We recorded a almost 4-hour conversation on the band ISIS on their one album called Panopticon, the post-metal band ISIS. And we like nerd the fuck out on it. And it's really good. I mean, it talks a lot about Michel Foucault, but it's more of like a lyrical analysis of, and also like the band in general and like the state of like modern like metal music. Because we wanted to like avoid like the fucking, bullshit Anthony Fantano just describing sounds. So that's
I can't
gonna
believe
be,
he's still relevant.
Oh, I know. But my buddy, like Matthew, he said it the best. He goes, Fantano, he's not really an art critic. He's more of a describer of sounds, which I think that is like the legacy of like the fucking Pitchfork, like Reddit appropriation of Moo, which is like what Anthony Fantano is. But anyways, so we do that. We're probably gonna do one in a few months or maybe a month from now on something else, because we usually like a lot of the videos we have are critiques. But episode 6, we like are covering something that we've both like grew up with and we both love. We might also do their other album, the one before they broke up as a band. It was called Wavering Radiant. And that's more of like, if Panopticon was more about Bentham and Foucault, Wavering Radiant's more of like the Jungian album. So yeah, I'm doing that. And hopefully like a lot of great things on the channel. Of course, Break the Rules, obviously. Tomorrow we're going to have the YouTuber Glink on, who is an excellent documentarian. He did the one video that blew up about California, the decay of California. He did the OnlyFans and Incel videos as well. So it's going to be fun. Next week, I believe we have Mary Harrington on.
Oh, she's great.
I think it's with her and maybe Alex Kashuda and someone else. Maybe this New York writer that I'm sort of have a thing for. Maybe. And then we have, so tomorrow is Glink. It's going to be a good stream with a big YouTuber. We just had the Count Dankula stream, which is pretty good. And then, so next week we have Mary Harrington, and also I think next week we have I forget. I think it's some other YouTuber. I forget.
No worries.
It's a video game stream or some crap that like Lev subjects me to. Anyways, so yeah, it's gonna be good. Break the rules, and then like later on in the month, I believe we're gonna have some other bigger guests. I think maybe we're trying to get like other YouTubers, like so. Yeah, it's gonna be good. Oh yeah, no. So sorry. Next week, speaking of bigger YouTubers, on Wednesday we usually broadcast Tuesdays and Thursdays, but next week it's gonna be Tuesday and Wednesday because of you fucking Americans with your Thanksgiving in November, can't figure that one out. As a leaf, we're gonna have a Thanksgiving special, and because Lev thinks of these puns in his head, we're gonna have Turkey Tom, the YouTuber, on. So it's going to be the Turkey Thanksgiving Turkey Tom stream. Our good friend Turkey Tom's going to come back and talk about a variety of lolcows that he covers on his channel. For those who do, I mean, I think he's pretty big, but he's like one of the last like truly great YouTube historian / reaction drama channels. He's a good friend of mine. So yeah, we're going to have Turkey Tom, and I don't know, Lev is probably going to invite a few other schizos on that one. So it's going to be the Thanksgiving special. So maybe we're going to do like, I don't know. He's got this inflatable turkey that's like a hunting decoy he bought for Turkey Tom streams that he calls Tom Turkey. Can you believe this shit? That's what he calls his turkey. Tom Turkey. And I go, and then he's like, when I went to the store, they had this other decoy that simulates the turkey's mating. Because by the way, I do a bit of hunting myself, or I did a while ago. And it's actually fairly hard to hunt wild turkeys. Like
Yes.
It's almost like hunting deer. So like they have this decoy, he said, where they simulate like one is on top of the other to simulate mating. And I could just like imagine like I could just imagine like your stereotypical like I guess like redneck, like they have like a huge like 4x4 Ford, and they have truck nuts, and they bought this like gimmick decoy at Spencer's, and they're like, I'm going to use this for hunting.
I know people like that. Don't get me started.
In Texas, do you have a pair of truck nuts?
No, I like a rootless Cosmopolitan. I don't own a truck.
Oh no.
No, I know, it's terrible. And my father was just like, hey, they're that new Ford hybrid F-150 looks cool. And I'm like, that's the most like soulless bugman thing I think I've ever heard my like base father talk about to me. But before we head off, I know that Bolero sent in a super chat for $4.99. He just said, President John Tyler has a living grandson, or had living, well, he had two. I think one of them died. I think one of them's still alive. He was the 10th president of the United States. Yeah, that's what happens when you knock somebody up at 78. He said sperm ages like wine and eggs age like bread. And that's
another thing about the wall, like you were saying. I believe like
I both love and hate the term because I think some of it's not real, but at the same time, I think when we kind of reach that middle age, there's that recognition of like biology is not what it once was.
They say like a woman can have like, I know, like, again, don't take this as a grain of salt. This is like esoteric health Twitter, like, Twitter bro science. They say that a woman can like have a reasonably healthy child in her late 30s if she takes what's that supplement? The hormone. Progesterone, I think it is. But no, the wall here's the thing. The wall there is a hard biological limit. Like even if a woman can have like a kid when she's in like her early 40s, of course it's not ideal for a variety of reasons. But the whole like bullshit about by the time she's 25, she's ran through, like that's
I hate that.
Incel pua. Like I was watching this smaller YouTuber who's like a Sigma pua, like, but his thing is like prostitute, like sex work, quote unquote. He's like, you have to realize that there are Giga Chad whoremaxers that are imbibing in sacred your androcentric cum shots with cunny slaves. Like that's the way he talks. The whole like, so basically like prostitution.
So just a TRP version of BAP at that point.
Pretty well, yeah, but like he's like, the pua chase is gynocentric, and really you need to whoremax in order to have a pure male androcentric cum shot So there are Giga Chad Hormaxers out there who have realized this and like take trips to like Thailand or the Philippines.
Does he actually talk like this IRL?
I swear to God, this is his cadence. I believe
this is how somebody gets punched on the street.
His channel is called, I can't believe I'm doing this.
Oh, don't.
Okay,
don't give people any ideas.
But if you look up LooksMax on Twitter, it's probably there. Because that's in his channel name, LooksMax. So, and it's funny because this guy, he looks like maybe not a 10 out of 10, but he looks pretty Chadish. He's built. He's got the Chad jaw. Like, this guy has no problem finding easy targets on Tinder. It's just like, I don't know, maybe something's wrong with him, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I personally think like people know that like when it comes to the incel thing, like I have a lot of nuanced thoughts about it. In my video that I'm coming out with tomorrow, I talk about how it becomes a sort of like political category of surveillance and biopower. But it's interesting, like this thing about like sex work and why can't we just Hormax? Like that's, I think it's missing the point, to put it lightly. I don't know. I think like as someone who, it doesn't matter how vulnerable and lonely and like starving of female attention I have, it's just like to visit a prosty, like, I don't know. Maybe I'm just judging people too harshly, but I think that there's something about it that I feel would even like, not even just like, it's not your true body count. It's more of like, at the end of the day, it really is exploitation on the most like intimate level. I know this, I'm totally sounding like Radfem Hitler right now, but like it's, I feel like that's not the solution to like what the real problem is with the sort of hikikomori neat incel explosion, or even the femcel question. I wonder, like, is the solution like in Japan where you got these like corporate girl boss femcels who go to like bars where a handsome man talks to you for half an hour, like for $50 a pop? Like,
or
is that the
white
solution?
Man cafe, you know,
the white man cafe. Yeah,
I don't know how. I couldn't tell you, but I mean, like, is that not the same? Is the inverse is the problem here with men, where men will slave away at a crappy job in order to drop $150 or more so their name can be heard, or pay their money with exact change so they can feel the touch of another person. Like, and this is where I can't relate, as I've said in that Substack, because I have that number. I never got into the PUA thing. I never got into the red pill thing. I just knew how to talk to people. I didn't understand the game. It's a foreign historical concept to me. It feels like if I were to dive into that, it'd be like reading like some like, you know, sexual version of Fanged Noumena, where I'm just like, I don't know what's going on, and I don't know why, but I'm here for it because
the sexual version of Fanged Noumena is GX by Nick's Land. That's what the sexual. It's funny. I said this to Mary. I said it would never happen, but could you imagine a BTR stream where Mary Harrington debates Nick's Land? That would be fucking great. Because she wrote that article on gender acts, and she got ratioed by all of these Picru Abbeys on Twitter for it. But no, I think like the Hormaxing thing is obviously interesting, but it's just like I think like here's the thing: game is largely bullshit. It's bullshit in the extent that they have these like Baroquean systems. Like, here's the thing. I'm still like a fucking kissless, hugless virgin incel loser. Don't take my advice. But I think it's bullshit in the sense that they're just harvesting techniques that are probably as old as time itself. Like in terms of confidence grifting, in terms of like how you approach your sense of self and your relation to other people. I think they're just taking very ancient forms of suggestion and repackaging them in this like shiny, like Mystery was the absolute king of this, like having the hats and the weird like terms, and a lot of these like black pillars that come from PUA. They have like these Baroquean language, like this Creole, like sub 6 Becky, sub 6, sub 5 Veronica, like shit like that. Like what about
I saw that the other day with that woman who like disabled her account. She's like, at the end of the day, you're still like a rural Indiana 5.
Yeah,
she was comparing herself to Rittenhouse's mom. And
Oh
that was
my
like
God.
that was the reply.
Brutal.
And like she deleted her account because of it.
Like I think the thing is like when like the way I look at it, it's like there's a difference between like the incel that has been jaded by modernity and who probably wants a more older form of companionship and intimacy. Then unfortunately the incels that are caught by like either the black pill or PUA, they want just like a piece of like the sexual revolution pie for themselves. And so you'll have like a more like ridiculous and exaggerated form of like Delicious Tacos being like, yeah, let's Hormax. But the problem is when you like actually read Delicious Tacos, like he's not exactly in like, okay, in some streams, I will admit he does like talk about it pretty openly, but you always sense that form of like longing there, that form of like there's an incompleteness to it, which the problem with a lot of these like Sigma grind set Pua types, like, you know, have come about after the decay of the manosphere. They like take writers like Delicious Taco. They're like, yeah, we got a fucking Hormax, and it's like, let's go to the Philippines. And this guy had a video, by the way, where he calculated the expense of like a really cheap round trip to the Philippines, and he's like, free pussy for 2 months, is like $2,000. Medication and antibiotics for STDs only $500. He's like, you could spend just like $7,000. You just drop $7,000 to have 2 months where you are a pleb Chad Hormax king in the Philippines. It's like, you know, like,
this is gonna be a real treat for anybody who makes it to the end of this.
Yeah.
Giga
Chad Hormaxing, that's the way of the future.
Here's some deep lore for you for internet history. But for
I will admit though that it is like prostitution probably is more, not that I endorse it, but you know, there are saints that say that there's places for it. It probably is more of a healthier, not like healthy, it's terrible for you, but like in terms of psychology, it's probably more healthy for your mind to actually have sex with a prosty than it is to like pay for an OnlyFans girl to send you a text message with like heart emojis at nighttime, you know, on Saturdays. I think that's probably, as much as I don't endorse it, I think that's probably a healthier way to go about it than like going to the fucking, you know, Japanese ear cleaning cafe where some like anime cosplay girl cleans your ears for you. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird.
Or she dresses up, or an OnlyFans girl dresses up. It's where people
double down and they will try to escape to their fantasy that they often see online, and I think that's a good way to sum it there.
She has to dress up like Momo, like she has to dress up like who's that character from One Piece?
I don't watch any anime, so I could not help you. The only thing I have seen was like the 90s version of Berserk.
Yeah. Like she's got to dress up like that one chick from Redline, and she's got to be in like her car and doing, I don't know what these fucking freaks pay for, but we should end this. This is almost like 3 hours. Holy crap.
Yeah, but I'll leave off with some announcements for you all, gents.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I have a video out this Friday. It'll come out, I believe, at 3 p.m. Eastern time. So it's a fishing video.
Giga Chad transhumanist Hormaxing.
It's basically about transhumanism meltdown and the coming dystopia where, you know, the lower classes can't functionally reproduce and the elites can, and things are going to be really shitty as they escape to the metaverse. But as I quote Nick Land's meltdown. In this,
do you quote was it him or Spandrel that first came up with the IQ shredder?
Spandrel did the IQ shredder. But I quote a line from Nick Land about how communist iconography gets integrated into the advertising system, and denunciations of it become like sold as integrated multimedia. And I'm like, that's basically what's happening now, right?
See, he could only write that like post 1990s when he was writing like
1994, and a lot of it's come true the more I keep rereading it.
But that line in particular, he could like only write like around the mid like 2010s when he was writing The Dark Enlightenment, because when he was writing Fang Newman, or a lot of the materials that went into Fang Newman, I actually have like the CCRU fucking book right here, just came in the mail, the archive. But he like was basically an anti-fascist for a long time, believe it or not. And he wrote
makes his career so interesting. This is why I want Michael Fassbender to play a biopic of Nick Land. I'm gonna like petition it and send a script out. But on Friday, there's the new fishing video, another real talk with a new intro. So there's upped production quality. So you guys will really like it. And then this Sunday, the usual Sunday stream on international relations and geopolitics, we continue our conversation on Belarus, Poland, migrants as weapon, taking a look at the larger picture of great power politics. Mr. Semiagog, Oliver, will be joining me, hopefully. So it'll be a very long and in-depth conversation with maps and more. So that's what I have going on. But for Thanksgiving, I do have two big things coming up. I will be that week, I believe on Wednesday, or actually Monday, I'm talking with Astral. We'll be talking about Decline of the West Volume 2. It'll be a great conversation.
Good friend of mine.
No, yeah, he's a powerful poster and a great writer and a good friend of both of us. And then on Thursday, I'll be talking with Alexander Adams of Bournebrook Magazine and RT, and he's a great artist and writer. So
I think I've heard of him.
He's a great guy. You should definitely reach out to him. He's been on Pharaoh's streams as well, so it'll be a good. He's been DMing me all the time. Anytime a new article that he writes comes out, I like him a lot. And then on Friday, I will be recording a conversation with the editor of Bournebrook Magazine for a podcast of theirs. So there is a lot up and coming. And as I've announced yesterday on Telegram, there is going to be an American-style event that happened over on the island that AA and co attended. I plan on attending in Nashville in February, so it'll be a lot of fun. So that's all of my announcements on top of the regular videos and such. And Gio, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
This was actually an awesome conversation for almost 3 hours.
Yeah, it went by fast, so...
I agree. I think the next time that we do something like this, I think that we should just do a full-on Ben-Hur conversation.
Oh, that could be great. Yeah, I would have to rewatch it, like the full thing.
Oh, yeah, rewatch the full thing and then come on.
When I was a kid, that one scene, the first time I watched it, I was a little kid. The one scene where Masala dies, where he's like holding himself up. They're going to cut his leg. That was fucking terrifying. Oh my God, I was terrified. But then, Ben-Hur, anyways, not to spoil, we're going to save it.
Yeah, we'll schedule something because I think that'll be a very fun time that could last probably just as long here.
Oh, man.
But ladies and gents, I know that Semiagog is about to start streaming, so go on, head over to there. I will see you all Friday at my video's premiere. I know that Gio's got something for tomorrow, so there's plenty of things to go on. And
Odyssey exclusive for tomorrow.
Odyssey exclusive, and all of that is in his link tree down below. So thank you all so much for watching this wonderful and long conversation. Plenty of topics reached. And you all take care and have a good evening.
God bless and goodbye.
Yeah, be prudent, everybody.